Hello there, everyone. My name is Dr. Joshua John Curry. I am the founder, president, and chief clinical director of multisystemic programming for Dr. Curry and Associates. I would like to welcome you all to this presentation, which is titled Fostering and Intensifying Our Comprehension of Personality Disorders. I would like to start this presentation off with an introduction to personality disorders. Personality disorders are enduring patterns of inner experience and behavior that deviates considerably from the expectations corresponding with what is unfolding regarding sociological and culturalization-related considerations of an individual. Personality disorders are pervasive and inflexible and traditionally have an onset during adolescent years or early childhood, subsequently resulting in distress, impairment, and perhaps even emotional and psychological dysregulation. Personality disorders are clustered based upon similarities, with the first cluster including paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders, the second cluster containing antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders, and the third cluster involving avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. Each of these respective personality disorders and their corresponding clusters I will dive deeply into later in this presentation. It is not an extraordinary occurrence for someone to endorse co-occurring personality disorders from differing clusters, such as a primary diagnosis of paranoid personality disorder with a secondary diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, and subsequently perhaps even a tertiary diagnosis of cannabis use disorder severe. Throughout this presentation, there will be discussions there will be psychoeducation that will focus on substance abuse, chemical abuse, and the correlation that has with perhaps even the manifestation or amplification of respective personality disorders. And also we're going to discuss the manner in which someone presenting with features of a respective personality disorder essentially falling into the lines of self-medication. The manifestation of generalized personality disorders transpire when two or more of the following circumstances present themselves. From a cognitive perspective, there are challenges perceiving and interpreting oneself, others, and happenings taking place surrounding oneself. Affectivity becomes problematical from the standpoint of there being issues regarding the ranges, intensity, ability, and appropriateness of emotional responses of the individual. In addition to interpersonal functioning, impulse control is a difficulty an individual perhaps experiences, conceivably responding to confusing situations as though a physical altercation is the most suitable option. There was a period of time during my career I was working with a gentleman. We did outstanding work together programmatically, predominantly one-on-one individual counseling sessions. He was working towards getting himself positioned to fulfill all of his obligations with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. He was on state parole. I learned that unfortunately, he did have some violence in his background. I was working with this gentleman in a co-occurring treatment facility, co-occurring mental health and substance abuse treatment facility. He presented with a primary diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Unfortunately, our time together professionally came to an end abruptly during a time in which he was actually grocery shopping. I learned from his parole officer that ultimately, upon investigations, watching the camera footage and things along those lines, he was approaching the checkout line around the same time as another shopper. It looked as though there was no, I wasn't privy to the video, I was just told this, but based off of what was disclosed to me, it looked as though this gentleman that I was working with and the other shopper approached the checkout line practically simultaneously. And there was no dialogue based upon who was going to go first, who was here first, and matters along those lines. What took place What took place, unfortunately, the other shopper had jumped in front of the client in which I was working with, rather than there being some form of mature dialogue, intellectually sound dialogue, or perhaps even saying, you know what, it's just another 5, perhaps even 10 minutes, depending upon how much groceries were needed to be checked out. It's just another few minutes in this grocery store. I'm going to leave here, all my stuff paid for, and go about my evening. Unfortunately, with his perhaps even his antisocial personality disorder diagnosis and other perhaps neurocognitive transformations that took place over the course of several years of chemical abuse, of polysubstance abuse, and other experiences regarding being incarcerated, perhaps even matters in which corresponding with nature, with nurture, with conditioning, socioeconomic considerations, sociological circumstances. There's an array of factors in which correlated with this gentleman in which I was working with making the decision to physically attack this other shopper. Unfortunately, this physical attack, it went from being assault to battery to aggravated battery. It became aggravated. Now, he didn't actually go, if we're not familiar with the criminal justice system and when an offense transitions into becoming aggravated, it didn't become aggravated until the gentleman was knocked to the ground. The client in which I was working with, and again, he had a primary diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. That was his primary clinical co-occurring diagnosis. In addition to that, he did have an array of other co-occurring disorder diagnoses. Unfortunately, here he knocked the gentleman to the ground. He had jumped on top of the gentleman, grabbed his head, and he started bashing his head against the floor. So in a sense, there, the floor is now a weapon. So he was unfortunately he was charged with multiple counts of aggravated battery. Each count corresponded with the amount of times he lifted the gentleman's head up off of the floor and banged it against the floor. It was north of 10 times. So he was charged with more than 10 counts of aggravated battery. And despite the great work that he was doing, despite how successful his societal reintegration was going, that incident there, and he did know that could have easily have transitioned into attempted murder. But he was charged with various counts of aggravated battery. Like I mentioned, perhaps that correlated with his antisocial personality disorder diagnosis, his other diagnoses, socioeconomic considerations, sociological considerations, whether we wanted to talk about genetic predispositioning to physical aggression, to conditioning through nurturing. There were an array of factors that ultimately connected with his antisocial personality disorder. And like I mentioned here is, whenever we're presented with a confusing situation, we feel as though that perhaps a physical altercation is the most suitable option. So rather than him processing and intellectualizing, I have a family at home, I have children that's depending upon me, I can't do as much for them incarcerated as I could as far as from a supportive standpoint if I'm out in society. So he felt the need from just being cut off in this checkout line, that he felt as though he had to physically attack this person. I wasn't able to speak with him since our last individual counseling session, but I would have liked to have asked him questions about matters along the lines of, did he go through any form of dissociation, of any form of depersonalization, any form of derealization? Did he separate from reality in any form? Was he thinking about his loved ones? Was he thinking about the great work he was doing, his employment, vocational training that he was involved with, taking college courses online? Did he think about the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections potentially putting him back in prison to serve out the remainder of his sentence? Did he think about taking things to a different level? What if he would have killed that gentleman? What if he would have been facing some form of murder charges? Now, with my understanding of the criminal justice system, under those particular circumstances, it wouldn't have been first-degree murder, but still, any level of murder comes with an extensive period of incarceration. Now, when it comes to personality disorders, the enduring patterns of personality disorders are inflexible and pervasive across an immense spectrum of personal and sociological situations, conceivably leading to clinically significant distress or impairment socially, occupationally, or supplementary areas of instrumental functioning. Characteristics of and episodes corresponding with personality disorders are endorsed by stability, and the correlating onset should be able to be traced to adolescent years or at least earlier adulthood. Characteristics of and episodes corresponding with personality disorder are not more sufficiently explained as a manifestation or consequence of another mental health disorder. Characteristics of and episodes corresponding with personality disorder are not attributable to the physiological effects of inebriation induced by substance abuse. From these particular perspectives regarding substance abuse, we're talking along the lines of a rehabilitative programmatic treatment environment. Someone's presenting with features of this particular personality disorder or that particular personality disorder, and as a clinical practitioner, we're utilizing the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. But also we must look into consideration, is their affect correlating with the recent misappropriation or abuse of any mind-altering chemical? Or is this person on some sort of medication management programming? But along these lines, as far as mind-altering chemicals, we're talking about substance abuse. So whether through self-disclosure or through some form of toxicological measures such as a urine analysis, it's been proven that this person has been abusing some form of amphetamine or central nervous system stimulant, perhaps even alcohol, whether it be beer, wine, or distilled spirits. Before we can accurately diagnose, regardless of the cluster, before we can accurately diagnose any personality disorder, we must make certain that this person's behavior is not attributable to being either inebriated, intoxicated, or even correlating with some form of withdrawal syndrome corresponding with substance abuse. So along those particular lines, features of a specific personality disorder should not be attributable or should not be more associated with the physiological effects of inebriation or intoxication that's triggered or induced by any form of chemical abuse or the introduction of a mind-altering chemical into the system. Judgments and diagnoses correlating with personality functioning should not be confused with complications associated with acculturation or assimilation. Acculturation is a process of social, psychological, and cultural change that stems from balancing two cultures while adapting to the prevailing culture of the society. A process where an individual adopts, acquires, and adjusts to a new cultural environment. When it comes to assimilation, assimilation is the process in which a minority group or culture comes to resemble a society's majority group, or assume the values and behaviors and beliefs of another group, whether fully or at least partially. So when we're speaking along the lines of acculturation or assimilation, from a personality standpoint, just getting oneself embedded into and going through the ingratiation process or proceedings corresponding with a new culture or differing sociological and environmental considerations. These particular circumstances could have bearing on one's personality traits, cognitive behavioral mannerisms, and such things along those particular lines. So as we're talking about the diagnosing of any form of a personality disorder, we must look into sociological considerations, including possible acculturation, assimilation, immigration, and things along those lines, because those particular matters, just from a sociological standpoint, could shock us to the point in which we do have some form of transformations from a personality standpoint, So what we're doing here is we're essentially just eliminating any affiliation as far as personality modifications or transformations that could be associated with acculturation or assimilation. The first personality disorder I would like to dive into is referred to as paranoid personality disorder. Now, when it comes to a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, the individual must present with a pervasive distrust or suspiciousness of others, such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by four of the following. The first being there are suspicions without sufficient basis that they are experiencing exploitation, harm, or deception of others. I first made mentioning of features of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis presenting in a variety of contexts and surroundings and atmospheres. I wanted to give an example of an occupational or professional environment. There could be, let's just say there's a department, and there's been specific individuals who've been identified as perhaps leaving that department for good reasons, of course, because of a career advancement opportunity in a different department, or perhaps even with a different organization under the same umbrella, so to speak. So what's taking place here is these particular individuals have been identified, and there have been individualized meetings between those specific individuals and upper management or representatives from leadership positions on the upper tier, so to speak. So what's taking place here is someone presenting with or endorsing features of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. They may perhaps find themselves monitoring how many times their counterparts or their contemporaries, or in this case their competition, have been called for meetings as far as with upper managerial representatives. So this person could feel as though, we'll just say there's three in total, including this particular person. This individual may feel as though that on this particular day, my counterparts have been identified or they've been called 7 times in total compared to my one. So under these particular circumstances, this particular person may feel as though that there's something taking place behind them. There's some form of deception that's happening. They can feel as though that the others are given a more sufficient opportunity to have that career progression that's going to take place. They may not realize that those particular meetings may not even correspond with the career advancement opportunity, but they've already been convinced. They've already convinced themselves. They're very suspicious about why their counterparts or in this case, their competition, like I mentioned, have been called. This in turn could cause them to behave differently when they are called or when they are reached out for something along those lines. Their level of frustration that could have manifested itself because of suspicions without sufficient basis, like I mentioned, could cause them to respond in a manner which, like if they've been asked, would you mind, of course, their supervisor may ask them, would you mind taking on a project that could possibly cause you to remain at work a little bit longer than anticipated? Rather than being that dedicated employee that got them in that position in which they've been identified to take on that career advancement opportunity, they may respond in a manner in which, how about you ask someone else? How about you ask this person or that person who've also been identified? This could take the supervisor, of course, by surprise. One, because of the display of perhaps insubordination and that behavior being uncharacteristic with how they've been behaving normally throughout their professional endeavor. Not understanding or not taking into account the paranoia or the suspiciousness with this person presenting with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. They could feel as though that they've been deceived. So that, in a sense, impacted their behavior, which could not only ultimately cost them that career advancement opportunity, but it could also cost them their job. Someone could find themselves, and we're remaining along the lines of an individual or a person presenting with characteristics of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. Someone could find themselves preoccupied with unjustified doubts about the loyalty or trustworthiness of those surrounding them. Going back to what I just mentioned about this person's looking in the hallway or being very attentive, whether visually or just listening to who is calling whom and for what particular reason. So they can feel as though that they never were in the hunt, so to speak, for this career advancement opportunity. They can feel as though that others have been disloyal, or that level of trust that they once had for their immediate supervisor, for those in upper management. They can feel as though that that trust is no longer valid. And this could position them to, even though they could have been into that theoretical driver's seat as far as that career advancement opportunity, now this person's searching the internet for perhaps a lateral move to a different organization outside of that respective umbrella because they feel as though that they've been exploited, they've been deceived, they're suspicious about what's taking place. That level of trustworthiness has been diminished significantly. And all of this could be manifesting itself, again, without sufficient basis. Circumstances could position someone to become reluctant to confide in others, out of trepidation or concern of shared information being utilized against them from a malicious perspective. This person may feel as though that there is some form of a physical ailment that they're a little bit concerned about. And rather than seeking hospitalization or seeking some sort of medical attention, they can feel as though that perhaps I should run this past someone just to get a different set of eyes, so to speak, on what's taking place. But with them presenting with features of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, rather than reaching out to someone who could perhaps intrigue them or give them that proverbial push in the direction of hospitalization, they can feel as though that that information could be used against them as a sign of weakness. Remaining along the lines of an occupational environment, with me mentioning that attributes of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis could manifest themselves in varying environments. So this person may feel as though that if I tell anyone that I'm in physical pain, if I tell anyone that I've been experiencing some sort of psychiatric ailment, so to speak, they could feel as though that information could be utilized against them, when all along the people surrounding them care for them unconditionally, perhaps love them unconditionally. And rather than looking at matters as a competition between each other as far as career progression, that person could put the human being first. Remaining along the lines of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to purposely seek demeaning, threatening meanings or messages when antecedents do not warrant such behaviors. This is something that could materialize, including persistently bearing grudges towards others. Continuing along the lines of a professional environment, there could be a multi-departmental, multidisciplinary, or perhaps even multi-organizational meeting or collaboration that's taking place. This particular person with this respective, or at least presenting with features of this respective diagnosis, and again, we're talking about a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. This person could have some of their work or intellectual property that's highlighted. Now, again, we're talking about a multi-departmental, multidisciplinary, perhaps even multi-organizational collaborative project. This person's intellectual property or something that they've done professionally could be identified, and we're all just coming together for the purpose of the overall success of this collaborative project. So as this person's work is being dissected, just to make certain that it will be presented in the best form possible, someone with features of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis could feel as though that they're being demeaned, that their work is being degraded, that they're being told in front of their face that their work or their productivity isn't good enough. And this corresponds with, it may not be an extraordinary occurrence for perceived character attacks to be met with hostility and or counterattacks. Along those lines, this person's having their intellectual property or their professional productivity dissected in front of their counterparts. This is where that person, rather than taking notes and say, okay, no problem, I'll go back to that theoretical drawing board and make the adjustments so this overall project could be the best version of itself that it can be. And also because of the work that I'm presenting with my name attached to it, to represent myself individually. as a professional. This person may respond in a manner in which that you couldn't do a better job than me. And of course, I'm just providing a hypothetical response. This person may feel as though this is the time for them to say, I am the most credentialed. I am the most educated person, not only in this department, not only in this organization, but as far as this collective team, as far as this collaborative effort. I am the most credentialed person here. I am the most educated person here. I am the most experienced person here. So who are you to tell me what I need to do as far as making the adjustments? Rather than looking at the constructive criticism, rather than looking at the recommendations that were made, it's okay, yeah, you know what? Now that we got a fresh set of eyes on things, I didn't see things from that standpoint. They're going to take things, or they could potentially take things as an attack, in which they feel as though they must meet with proportionate hostility or perhaps even some form of counterattack, when all in all, from a circumstantial standpoint, none of which was even warranted. Because ultimately, the purpose of what was taking place was to make certain that the collaboration is as successful as it could possibly be. I spoke of someone endorsing a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis and their corresponding attributes manifesting themselves across various contexts in multiple environments. Just like we just gave the hypothetical scenarios that could take place in a professional atmosphere, these occurrences, as far as the levels of suspicions or suspiciousness, deception, trustworthiness being diminished along those lines, this is something that could take place as far as an intimate partner relationship. Hypothetically, someone could be endorsing a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. They're involved with a significant other, whether it be a boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance, husband, wife, or whatever variation of an intimate partner that we're speaking of. But either way, their intimate partner could reach out to them through notification, any form of notification, and they could share with them that there are some obligations they must tend to. So, out of the blue, they may not be home at the time in which they're normally home. Whether we're talking about stopping by a grocery store, getting some gasoline for the automobile, so we don't have to do that early in the morning. Let's just take care of that now. We're talking about stopping past the home of a loved one, with this person just abruptly reaching out to their intimate partner and telling their intimate partner, again, with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. This could be wholeheartedly innocent. This person just say, you know, I haven't seen an uncle in about 2 months. I haven't spoken to this uncle sufficiently for a very long time. I'm driving past his home. I'm going to just stop by, spend an hour or so with my uncle, just to make sure that we're just moving along there as far as that relationship. And also, I just haven't seen my uncle in a while, and been so busy with my own life. He's been busy with his life. Our schedules happen to be compatible at this time. We're just going to meet up just to talk, perhaps even for some lunch, perhaps even for a snack or a bite to eat, or even just to watch a television programming, whatever the case may be, as far as their respective dynamic. The individual with the paranoid personality disorder may say, okay, this is all out of the blue. You normally get home at this particular time. Now all of a sudden, you're reaching out to me and telling me that you're going to go see this uncle. So rather than this person saying, yeah, you know what, as far as me being attentive to what's taking place within our relationship, I know you have not spoken to or been around that uncle in about 2 months. The person with the paranoid personality disorder diagnosis may look at things and say, okay, you're using that uncle as an excuse to perhaps engage in some form of adultery or step outside of our relationship, so to speak. When in all actuality, this could be totally innocent. It wouldn't be far-fetched for the person to say, rather than you spend one-on-one time with your uncle, I'm going to come over as well. So now that we're going over there, which could be totally fine under different circumstances, now that we're going over there because of trustworthiness-related matters, if this engagement does take place between the two intimate partners and the uncle, now we're coming together, there could be some form of tension. There could be some form of resentment And this could be something that the uncle could pick up without even realizing what's taking place. The uncle could say to himself or even reach out to whomever, through some form of discreet notification just to ask, okay, is everything okay? Now the uncle's being told that yes, everything is okay. It's just that when I told my intimate partner I was coming to see you, there was a little bit of dialogue about the sincerity or the validity as far as me coming to see you. Perhaps even, and again, everyone's dynamic's different. There are some intimate partners who want to keep things within their relationship. There are some who decide to utilize their loved ones, utilize their family and friends as far as venting, as far as seeking advice, particularly in the case we're talking about an uncle who generally is older, perhaps have a little more life experience, perhaps have a level of wisdom that the intimate partners have not reached yet as far as their time on earth and matters along those lines. But regardless of the dynamic, now the uncle's in a position in which he may come to the forefront and discuss that. It's very important for us to trust our intimate partners. This is someone that we've made the decision collectively with as far as constructing and building a life together. It's very important in a relationship to have a heightened level of trustworthiness. And of course, until proven otherwise, let's not go out there and seek, or let's not go out there and automatically convince ourselves that there's some form of deception that's taking place. Again, with someone presenting with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, going back to their characters being attacked. This person, rather than saying, rather than sitting back and saying to themselves that, perhaps I do have a lot going on right now, perhaps I did let frustrations and other matters that's taking place from different aspects of life. Perhaps I did take out those frustrations and concerns onto you, being that easy target. This person could feel as though that, okay, now my intimate partner is sharing our details of our relationship with someone who this person may feel as though you shouldn't be privy to such information. So now something as innocent as traveling home from work and stopping by for an hour or so to go see a loved one. Now this is transitioned from that being problematical. So now we're having discussions to the point in which some form of professional intervention may be needed, as far as some form of family counseling session to help one intimate partner learn about, on a more psychoeducational level, as far as attributes corresponding with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, or perhaps even some form of counseling with a licensed, credentialed, perhaps board certified marriage and family therapist. Along those lines, now we ventured into those realms. Well, all along is the ultimate issue is features of a paranoid personality disorder manifesting themselves because of someone deciding that they're just going to utilize time coming home from work just to go stop and spend a little bit of time with a loved one whom they haven't seen for a couple of months. I am a board certified family recovery specialist. I'm also a certified allied addiction practitioner. I do have I have been fortunate enough from a professional standpoint. I do have quite a few additional professional credentials. The reason why I'm mentioning this is I use everything that I've learned as far as co occurring professional developmental education. I use that, and I'm a huge advocate of family counseling sessions. And of course, with the client's permission, anytime I offer a family counseling session, and once those arrangements are made by the client, I like for the client to make those arrangements just to make certain that they are with the client doing that rather than me reaching out to loved ones. I want it to come from the client. I want the client to share with their loved ones why this is important. And once these arrangements are made, I always let the client and loved ones know I don't need much at any time. I just need to know the date and time, and I already have some things that's been identified because those problematical circumstances have put me in a position in which I felt as though this is the time for a family counseling session, or for us all to at least consider diving into agreeing to attend a couple, at least a couple or a few family counseling sessions. So one thing I'll do, I'll manufacture a list of things that I'll present to a client. I'm a huge believer in matters being collaborative between myself as a practitioner and between the client. So I have a list of things, and depending on what's taking place, as of now, during this presentation, we're talking about a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. So what I'll share here is I'll identify one particular diagnosis or respective diagnoses, depending on what's happening. What positions me to say, you know what, this is the time for a family counseling session, at least one. Let's just agree to one and move forward from there. What I'll do here is I'll explain attributes corresponding with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. What I'm touching on here is whether we're talking about suspiciousness, hostility, argumentativeness, whether we're talking about matters along those lines. We're talking about hypervigilance, antisocial behavior and demeanors and matters along those lines, perhaps even a sense of coldness. What I'm doing here is I'm explaining matters that correlate with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. Again, with the client's permission, I'm discussing what we're doing collectively or from a collaborative standpoint to at least work towards the reduction of features of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. Reasoning behind this is, at least me, that's why I spoke about a couple of professional credentials I have. I have a thorough understanding of clinical diagnoses. I have a thorough understanding of a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis. Now we're talking about a loved one who perhaps does not have this understanding, who perhaps have not had time or perhaps have not had it presented to them that with them being involved in this relationship, whether we're talking about an intimate partner, a parent-child, an uncle, niece, nephew, siblings, cousins, this person or these people or these loved ones perhaps have not had it at least presented to them that maybe they should sit and read and dive into contemporary literature so you can at least understand this particular diagnosis a little further. So whenever X happens, whenever Y happens, whenever Z happens, there is some form of understanding from a contemporary literature standpoint of why it happened. Perhaps even the loved one could be positioned to say, okay, here are a series of events that are unfolding or manifesting themselves. So with me already being proactive with recognizing or with the identification of this taking place, here is perhaps how my loved one may respond or may counter at some point. So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing to attention that whenever we're talking about someone with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis, it could be very problematical for them to maintain close, significant, perhaps even intimate relationships. And this could all be aligned with their argumentativeness, with their suspiciousness, with their hostility, with their level of verbal or perhaps even physical aggression that could stem from aggressiveness turning or transitioning into anger. I'm just working here to make certain that relationships are not tainted or come to an end because of a clinical diagnosis that's recognized by the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I want to make certain that loved ones recognize that whom they care about, this person has a clinical diagnosis, this person has a diagnosed personality disorder that is perhaps troubling them from a neurological, neurocognitive, or perhaps even cognitive behavioral standpoint. Individuals with a paranoid personality disorder diagnosis could develop and of course this is all hypothetical, a major depressive disorder diagnosis, an agoraphobia with panic attacks diagnosis, and or an obsessive compulsive disorder diagnosis, perhaps all as primary, secondary, tertiary, and supplementary diagnoses. In addition to those diagnoses, there could be co-occurring substance use disorder diagnoses needing clinical intervention, with the substance use disorder or disorders being primary, secondary, tertiary, supplementary, or potentially even unknown as far as the categorization or prioritization of those respective diagnoses. This could be a situation by which self-medication is resorted to, and this is something that I've witnessed personally and as well as throughout my professional career, as far as those being efforts to soothe emotional or psychological dysregulation or distress, and possibly ongoing chemical abuse inducing or triggering or potentially even increasing the onset, severity, and frequency of psychiatric episodes. With us talking about self-medication to soothe emotional or psychological dysregulation or imbalancing or distress, now we're talking about an array of additional, perhaps even psychiatric episodes or challenges manifesting themselves because of the physiological effects of self-medication. When we're engaging in self-medication, unfortunately, someone perhaps may not be in a position to quantify what they're ingesting or smoking or inhaling, whichever version of introduction to their bodies, they may not be quantifying. Because when we're talking about self-medication, the predominant purpose, under the vast majority of circumstances, is to soothe what's triggering or what's causing emotional or psychological dysregulation or distress or imbalancing neurologically. So this person is merely seeking. They may not be looking to experience any form of inebriation, and of course everyone is different, every circumstance is distinguishing and distinctive along those lines. This person may not be seeking to endure any form of inebriation or separation from reality from any standpoint. This person is merely looking to calm themselves, to get themselves to a point in which they could think clearly, in which they could relax. So now we're talking about respective primary, secondary, tertiary, supplementary, and or perhaps unknown diagnoses, all in which have been diagnosed clinically, have been diagnosed professionally. And we're talking about the potential existence of co-occurring substance use disorder diagnoses. So now we've gotten ourselves involved with self-medication. If we're engaged in any form of other medication management programming, such as behavioral health medication management programming, to hypothetically address the aforementioned agoraphobia with panic attacks disorder diagnosis, or we're talking about some form of medication-assisted treatment programming. And in this case, we did speak about substance use disorders or diagnoses presenting themselves. Now we're talking about an opioid use disorder severe on maintenance therapy diagnosis. Now this person's involved with some form of Suboxone-related medication-assisted treatment programming. So where I'm getting at here is this person has at least two differing medications, and in some cases from two different prescribing physicians and two different clinical environments. So now, in addition to those two medications with more than one diagnosis, now we're talking about self-medication, whether that be with licit or illicit chemicals. This person is now introducing substances into their system without supervision from a medical practitioner. So now we could be exposing ourselves to perhaps even the onset or amplification of whatever diagnosis or diagnoses that we should be working towards diminishing features of rather than amplifying. Now is where I would like to concentrate on schizoid personality disorder. The essential characteristic of schizoid personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships, coupled with a restricted range of expression of emotions during interpersonal settings. This propensity traditionally commences during early adulthood and manifests itself in a variety of settings. There's a presentation of lacking desire to experience intimacy, an illustration of being indifferent towards opportunities to develop close relationships, and an appearance of not pursuing involvement with loved ones from a socialization standpoint. Someone with a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis, they could be invited to some form of gathering, which could be very expensive, could be very exotic, but all the expenses and everything could be covered. All they have to do is bring themselves. Everything is provided for them. Rather than being excited about the opportunity, rather than being appreciative of everything being covered for them, there could be, from their standpoint, there could be concerns about interaction. Despite being in that environment, and I'm talking about interaction with others, despite being in that environment in which we should be relaxing, we should be having fun, we should be enjoying ourselves, this person could find themselves detached from others. They could feel as though that there's them being there was a mistake. They have nothing in common with anyone there, even if we're talking about loved ones. They have no desire. They're not going to go out of their way to interact with anyone. They may perhaps even reach a point of intentionally avoiding others. There could be some form of, if we're talking about a family reunion that's on a lake. So there's not going to be any engagement with water activities. There's not going to be any involvement with any gangs that could have been identified or recommended. They may not want to eat and sit near others. They may grab a cheeseburger. They may grab a hot dog. They may grab some snacks and some beverages and go sit off by themselves. What they're doing here is they're not attempting to be disrespectful or condescending in any manner purposely. Unfortunately, with the makeup of them from a neurocognitive, neurological standpoint, this is their personality. Again, we're talking about a schizoid personality disorder. This person is just very uncomfortable, and they're not looking to engage with anyone. Even if there are circumstances in which they're obligated, such as perhaps traveling in an automobile or traveling on a bus from one location to another. This could be something, rather than just sitting and laughing and having a good time, this could be something that could be very uncomfortable for them. And this level of discomfort could be something that could become possibly contagious and make those around them uncomfortable as well, because of the manner in which because of their affect and the manner in which they've engaged or presented to others, is that they don't want to be around others. So this, in a sense, could make others perhaps feel uncomfortable as far as their presence, and they may grow to not want to be around them as well. Individuals with a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis oftentimes carry themselves as though there is indifference regarding the approval or criticism of others, and present as though they are not bothered by what others may think of them. There are consistent episodes at which such individuals demonstrate a constricted affect and appear somewhat aloof. From a clinical programmatic perspective, a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis should not be administered if corresponding behavioral characteristics could be more sufficiently connected with another mental health disorder, including another personality disorder, or perhaps even intoxication or withdrawal symptomatology because of recent chemical abuse, or some form of neurological or neurocognitive challenge or circumstance or corresponding considerations. An identical approach should be assumed when it comes to potential physiological effects triggered by some sort of medication programming. A schizoid personality disorder diagnosis should not be assigned when culturalization related matters are affiliated with the dynamic, such as someone relocating from a rural environment to a heavily populated urban metropolitan area. Such relocations, could position someone to be a little bit shy. So in a sense, if we're looking at such behaviors in which there's not any proactivity or not an assertive approach to interact with others, rather than someone endorsing at least characteristics of a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis, this person could just be overwhelmed with immense shyness, and perhaps could find themselves in a position in which there literally is nothing in common as far as personalities go, just because of that significant relocation and change of scenery. So rather than diving into a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis, this person could just need some time to acclimate themselves to their newly acquired, heavily populated urban metropolitan area, from a sense of being taken away from or moving away from or relocating from a rural environment. Such implications are applicable for circumstances by which immigration takes place. Again, the same thing, traveling or relocating or immigrating from one nation to another. There's going to be a lot of culturalization sociological, socioeconomical considerations that's taking place there. And there are acculturation and assimilation being experienced, highlighting the significance of practitioners being adept of and empathetic towards cross-cultural considerations. So speaking along the lines of cross-cultural considerations, whenever those particular matters correspond significantly with the respective dynamic of what's taking place with the client, whether we're talking about the relocation from a rural environment consistent with the United States of America transitioning into a heavily populated urban environment or urban metropolitan area, or someone essentially moving or immigrating from the Eastern Hemisphere to the Western Hemisphere. Either one of those situations could cause someone to, whether we're talking about fashion trends, whether we're talking about behavioral attributes, whether we're talking about traditions corresponding with the new geographical area, an individual may need a little bit of time, or perhaps even a lot of time, or a significant period of time to adjust, to get themselves accustomed to that. And there were times in which I spent a significant amount of time with the United States Army. So even being an adult and traveling, not just from one state to another, but traveling from one nation to another, there were times in which I just felt myself needing to get myself ready to transition out there. As far as my memory serves me, there were times in which I may need a couple of weeks just to leave the safety of where I was living at. Just not that things were dangerous or anything along those lines. I was just I needed some time for myself, just to get myself psychologically or emotionally prepared to just go out there and take part in something different. As I matured, as I grew, this is something that's not more so psychological, which corresponds with perhaps reasoning behind why a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis may not be applicable under such circumstances. This was something just more personal. During those particular times, I was not the type. I did not have the personality characteristics to ingratiate wholehearted change expeditiously. I needed time with that, and this was something that just changed with myself as I became older, so to speak, as I matured, endured, or obtained more wisdom. Just coming to the realization that in life change is inevitable, and rather than holding on to what I just left or what I just lost, all we can do here is, because that's now in the past, all we can do here is move forward, ingratiate our new surroundings, and just be appreciative of what we have from that standpoint. So as far as relocation, whether we're talking about from a rural area to an urban area, or from one nation to another nation, an individual just may need some time. Some human beings may ingratiate change and may be excited about that type of change and dive into things expeditiously, and others may need a little bit of time. And there are some out there, like I used to be, I may need a little bit more. I may need a little bit more time than others, and there are people out there that's just like that. And that's not something that's more so psychological or psychiatric from a rehabilitative standpoint. This is just something that's more individualized as far as more so personality characteristics. So this is reasoning behind whenever these sort of dynamics are introduced into what's taking place. Perhaps we should not be as quick to connect things with a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis. An instrumental attribute of schizotypal personality disorder is an extensive history of social and interpersonal deficits marked by acute discomfort with and reduced capacity for close relationships. This is also accompanied by cognitive or perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behavior, being demonstrated by at least early adulthood and illustrated across a spectrum of contexts. These individuals could find themselves infatuated with paranormal activities, teleportation, and other illustrations of dissociation and derealization, by which are not psychological effects of substance abuse or the manifestation of the utilization of prescription medication. There could be a heightened illustration of anxiousness or apprehensiveness in social settings. And this is something that could be a particular nature when it comes to being surrounded by people in which we are unfamiliar with. Even if time persists, I'm talking about we're in this gathering and 15, 20, 30, 45, 60, perhaps even 2 hours passed. This level of unsettlement and discomfort is something that could still be manifested. When it comes to someone presenting with a schizotype or personality disorder diagnosis, their suspiciousness and unsettling affect amplifies, with their social anxiety coming across as an agoraphobia with panic attacks, or a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis. From a rehabilitative programmatic standpoint, this is perhaps reasoning behind why a schizotype or personality disorder diagnosis is oftentimes inaccurately diagnosed as some sort of agoraphobia or anxiety related diagnosis in clinical environments. When I was putting this presentation together and I was conducting my research to make certain that things were as intellectually sound as possible, this is something that positioned me to come across clients in which, or at least think about clients in which I've provided clinical services for. Now, as far as, and I listed these particular diagnoses on purpose, as far as someone presenting with or endorsing characteristics of an agoraphobia with panic attacks, or a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis. Those are two diagnoses that I found myself leaning heavily towards throughout my career. And as I'm utilizing, as I'm putting my documentation together, I'm leaning upon the fifth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I'm in a position to say, okay, yeah, this looks right along lines with what my client is disclosing. So I feel as though, and of course, collaborating with counterparts and matters along those lines, just to get a fresh set of eyes on things. So, do you see? I'm asking, do you see, based upon what I've told, what I've documented, do you see an agoraphobia with panic attacks, or a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis? And as I'm presenting matters from my perspective, my counterparts agreeing, and along these lines, we just move forward. Where I was diving into, I don't have much recollection. There are a couple of clients who are popping into my mind as I was putting this presentation together. But what I was diving into was, as far as a schizotype or personality disorder diagnosis, I don't have much recollection of working with many clients who endorsed a schizotype or personality disorder diagnosis in comparison to those in which who presented with an agoraphobia with panic attacks, or a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis. And this made me go back to, and of course, diagnoses are fluid, and from a terminology standpoint, from that perspective, there are some diagnoses that essentially they have similar characteristics, they have very corresponding features. So rather than seeing this, even if we have the literature right in front of us, rather than seeing what is wholeheartedly accurate, it isn't extraordinary for clients to be inaccurately diagnosed. Like in this particular case, someone that's anxious or apprehensive in social settings, that level of unsettlement and discomfort amplifies over time. Now we're thinking about, okay, are we connecting this with agoraphobia? Are we scared to be out in public settings? Are we concerned? Or is that level of apprehensiveness and anxiousness? Are we pretty much saying, from a clinical standpoint, that we are afraid to be around others? So, and as we're talking about those effects amplifying, so now that looks like an agoraphobia with panic attacks diagnosis. And we could, unfortunately, inaccurately place that as a potentially primary diagnosis. So as we're utilizing that, and clients saying yes, based off of the research, that not that we want clients to self-diagnose, but a client saying yes, I've heard that before, I've been diagnosed with that before. So we have all this, from what we perceive to be supportive evidence of an agoraphobia with panic attacks, of a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis, when in all actuality, the client's actually presenting with a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis. So this is something, As far as diagnoses, one thing that I've gotten into the habit of doing throughout my career as I gained more wisdom, gained more experience as time progressed, I said, let's go back and reassess diagnoses because diagnoses, whether we're talking about mental health, substance abuse slash co-occurring, diagnoses are fluid. We can have diagnoses go from unspecified to mild to moderate to severe to an early remission to in sustained remission, matters along those lines. We could dive into some literature and come to this point and say, you know what, for the past year, I've been focused on a generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis. Diving into some more contemporary literature and actually focusing with the client and looking at things from a neutral standpoint rather than leaning towards that generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks diagnosis as far as the specification. Looking at things from a fresh set of eyes standpoint, this particular client all along has endorsed a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis. So now all we can do there is reassess the matters, get things up to date as far as documentation from an accuracy standpoint, and move along accordingly from a programmatic perspective. Particularly in response to emotional distress or psychological dysregulation, an individual with a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis may experience transient psychotic episodes, which potentially could last minutes or perhaps even hours at a time. This is something that could possibly be synonymous with the abuse of hallucinogens. Whenever it comes to any form of diagnosis, whether we're talking about a mental health disorder diagnosis, we want to make certain that, with me mentioning the abuse of hallucinogens, we want to make certain that whether we're talking about hallucinogens or any other chemical grouping or chemical categorization, that the abuse of that is not triggering or amplifying or perhaps even causing these sorts of transient psychotic episodes. Just like when we're talking about a substance use disorder diagnosis, we want to make certain that whatever an individual is endorsing, we want to make certain that those particular features or the affect or whatever is associated with what's taking place could not be more sufficiently explained because of a psychiatric episode. Individuals presenting with this disorder, and we're talking about a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis, generally refrain from engaging in impulsivity or manipulative behavior synonymous with other clinical diagnoses. Despite that, co-occurring mental health disorders and substance use disorders are oftentimes present, which could include also some sort of hallucinogen abuse related or hallucinogen use related disorder diagnosis, which could make the determination of such distinctions a little more problematical, which is why I wanted to again explain, making certain that whatever someone is endorsing, we're going to lock into a specific diagnosis. And even going back to what I just mentioned briefly not too long ago, as far as diagnoses being inaccurately diagnosed because of the similarities as far as attributes being related to other clinical diagnoses. We want to make certain that whatever we're going to go along with from a programmatic standpoint, and in this case we're talking about a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis, we want to make certain that whatever is unfolding or materializing in front of us, or whatever is being manifested, that these particular attributes or the affect or the behavior could not be more adequately explained through a different mental health disorder diagnosis, including a substance use disorder diagnosis, or including recent inebriation or intoxication because of substance abuse, or perhaps even, with me previously mentioning some form of medication management programming. Even if the person is not abusing the medication, there could be times, particularly when we're commencing any form of medication management regimen, in which our bodies, as it's going through the acceptance, as it's going through experiencing those physiological affects, our bodies or our systems, or from a neurocognitive standpoint, we could need some time to adjust to medication. So we want to make certain that whatever is taking place with us from a cognitive behavioral standpoint or from an affect perspective, we want to make certain that matters could not be more officially or sufficiently associated with something else, rather than a schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis. We have reached a point in the presentation in which I would like to place an emphasis on antisocial personality disorder. Whenever I've mentioned this throughout my career to someone, it was their first time as far as a client talking about antisocial personality. It isn't extraordinary for them to come back with me as far as, no, Dr. Curry, I like people, I love people, I have an array of friends, I'm engaged with my family. So I want to make certain as I go along with this that we're not talking about, as far as the name of this diagnosis, we're not talking about someone who finds it problematical to engage with others, and we want to dive into that. As far as an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis, people endorsing features of this respective clinical diagnosis illustrate a disregard for and infringement upon the rights of others, oftentimes commencing during childhood while transitioning into early adulthood. Manipulation and deceptiveness are instrumental features of antisocial personality disorder, including varying illustrations of aggressiveness towards people and animals, destruction of property, and an inability to sustain control of criminogenic impulsiveness. The manifestation of a pattern of impulsiveness may present itself through the individual demonstrating complications planning ahead comprehensively. I would like to connect criminogenic impulsiveness, or an inability to sustain control of criminogenic impulsiveness, with demonstrating complications regarding planning ahead comprehensively. Let's take two intimate partners. One intimate partner is totally innocent. The other intimate partner feels as though that there's some form of discretion that's taking place as far as stepping outside of the relationship. Intimate partner A decides to go meet with an associate of theirs with no ill intentions whatsoever as far as tainting their intimate relationship. Intimate partner B decides to track down their intimate partner, and intimate partner B decides to bring a baseball bat along with this endeavor. They take the baseball bat to intimate partner A's automobile. So now, as far as destruction of property, corresponding that with an inability to sustain control of criminogenic impulsiveness. Intimate partner B, while taking that baseball bat to intimate partner A's automobile, they're not thinking about the hundreds upon hundreds, perhaps even thousands upon thousands of dollars of insurance claims that's about to take place. For those of us who've been involved in insurance claims, depending on the circumstances, we're probably looking at some form of report by a law enforcement officer, by a responding police officer. So now what's happened here is intimate partner B, in addition to the insurance claims that are going to take place, and now the need, despite perhaps not even wanting to, but now the need to call law enforcement to at least get the insurance claim going. Now intimate partner B is looking at some form of criminogenic offense. They've engaged in this form of vandalism. Could perhaps, depending upon the jurisdiction and the nature of the offense, it could transition from a minor non-traffic offense to a misdemeanor, to perhaps even being felonious. Now we're talking about serving time, a significant period of time in a county, state, or correctional institution, or federal correctional institution. And this person going back, connecting that with the individual demonstrating complications planning ahead comprehensively. This person's perhaps is heartbroken, but rather than looking into what's taking place, or rather than just trusting their intimate partner, they take things to the extreme because of features related to their antisocial personality disorder diagnosis. They go from not believing their intimate partner, or at least saying, okay, when we get back together, let's at least sit, let me share how I've been feeling, and perhaps we can make adjustments as significant others. Rather than doing all of that, what we're going to do here is take a baseball bat and perpetrate this act of vandalism. Now, in addition to the intimate partner B's potential encounters with the criminal justice system now, intimate partner A, now we're talking about planning ahead comprehensively. This could hinder intimate partners A fulfillment of responsibilities either later that day or subsequently following during the next day. which could include not being able to make it to work. Now, intimate partners B's becoming heartbroken over something that's not justifiable has placed their significant other in a position in which now they're having their employment perhaps jeopardized because they're missing a day of work because of perhaps not having the means of transportation to make it there, especially if we're living in an area in which public transportation is not as fruitful in comparison to other areas. So as far as not planning ahead, intimate partner B is now facing encounters with the criminal justice system. They perhaps now have to find the funds to hire an attorney to make certain that whatever happens to them as far as reprimanding, to at least lower the likelihood of them becoming incarcerated. Because now all of this is taking place, and their significant other, by the way, like I mentioned, is now in a position in which their employment could perhaps be in jeopardy, especially if there were occurrences in which their attendance at work has been tainted because of unrelated reasons. This is something that just going back to the old adage, when it rains it pours. This is something that's just adding more water there, so to speak, as far as this particular theoretical rainstorm. All of this happened as far as additional complications from an employment standpoint, coupled with intimate partner B's involvement with the criminal justice system. All of this happened because of features corresponding with an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis. The demonstration of disregard for consequences, lacking an illustration of remorse, appearing indifferent towards or presenting rationalization for misappropriations, is not an extraordinary occurrence. This could include place blaming directed towards the entities whom experienced the victimization, such as statements made centering on the one whom endured the victimization, deserving what happened to them because of engagements they perhaps had involvement with. These behavioral attributes could extend into their romantic lives. One example of that is when we're talking about criminogenic impulsiveness or sustaining control over criminogenic impulsiveness and romantic lives. We're talking about occurrences centered around intimate partner violence. An individual could perhaps, unfortunately, whether they struggle with some sort of anger management related issues, they potentially endorse features of an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis, or some other psychological or psychiatric related matters. An individual could perhaps make the decision to engage in some form of intimate partner violence. This is something that is unfortunately something that does happen sociologically, at least here in the United States of America. It is something that many people perhaps could attest to having experience with, whether that be as a victim or unfortunately as a perpetrator. Regardless of the situations that come into place that ultimately led to these situations manifesting themselves, someone with features of an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis, rather than looking internally, rather than saying, wow, I am very remorseful for what I did. This isn't how I was raised. This isn't the expectations my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, those in which who had, even teachers, coaches, those in which who had their hands, so to speak, in the pot in which that pot was my collective overall well-being related development. This isn't something that was taught to me. This isn't something that was encouraged. Perhaps, depending on family or household dynamics, this isn't something that I've witnessed growing up. But for some reason, there was an issue with my intimate partner, and I decided that the most appropriate, sufficient way to handle it was through intimate partner violence. I perhaps need some form of aggression replacement therapy, some form of anger management treatment, matters along those lines. This person, rather than looking internally, saying, perhaps there are some underlying psychiatric challenges that perhaps have gone undiagnosed up to this particular point in my life that I need to have addressed. This person will look externally, predominantly towards, or perhaps towards their intimate partner. Perhaps he or she should have done this. He or she should have done that. He or she shouldn't have worn this. he or she shouldn't have gone to that particular place. He or she knows how to press my proverbial buttons. It's their fault. It isn't my fault. If he or she would only listen to me and do what I'm asking, or perhaps even do what I'm demanding, this wouldn't have happened. He or she knows that I'm a relatively nice person, and I don't want to do this type of thing. But he or she is, unfortunately, this is something that perhaps they want. So this isn't my fault. So someone at least presenting with features of an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis, whenever they engage in any form of sociological misappropriation, some form of deviance, perhaps even some form of criminogenic impulsiveness or criminality, the vast majority of the time, they will look externally and they will say, whatever took place, even though I had my hands in it either partially or wholeheartedly, whatever took place, it's not on me, it's on them, it's on you all. We have reached a point in the presentation in which we will transition into borderline personality disorder. One of the more essential characteristics of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis is habitual instability, corresponding with interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsiveness, traditionally manifesting itself by early adulthood in a variety of settings. Abandonment is very essential when it comes to matters corresponding with a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. Abandonment is a significant concern for those presenting with characteristics of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, with efforts being made to avoid actual or perceived abandonment. There was a time in which I was transitioning from the public sector into the private sector, essentially starting my own practice. I spoke with a client. She did present with features of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. It wasn't something that was diagnosed. It wasn't something that was added to treatment planning. She did share with me over the course of a few years we did work together that this was something that was more so problematical for her during her earlier years as far as adulthood, but something that she felt though she has persisted away from in a pro-social manner. But from time to time, utilizing a self-centered approach, there would be mentioning of abandonment related matters that she felt as though that were not wholeheartedly addressed. There was always a lot of things taking place in her life. I would essentially meet with her weekly, and sometimes that would move to bi-weekly because she was engaged with programmatic rehabilitation outside of the organization I was working with. She was employed. She was doing a great job as being a single mother to her 5 children. She was a full-time college student, maintaining a perfect grade point average. So she was, where I'm getting at was, during our 60 minutes or 75 minutes, weekly or bi-weekly, there was so much that needed to be discussed, so much happening in the present tense. There wasn't a lot of time to dive into matters that perhaps took place in the past that potentially still had some sort of correlation with who she is today from a cognitive behavioral decision-making perspective. And here's where I'm going. I'd share with her that I would like for her to, I did tell her, as well as each of the clients that I was working with, that there were plans, at least, that I had in the works. And this was a few months prior to me actually making this move. I did have plans on transitioning into the private sector and starting my own practice. I let everyone know and said, of course, I would be surely humbled if you wanted to continue your treatment with me, if we are allowed to do so. If you would want to do so, it matters along those lines. She was one who said yes, she wanted to transition with me, and I talked with her about insurance and things along those lines, and said, I'm not worried about that at this particular point in time. Let's just continue with what we're doing, and the insurance and the finances and all that stuff, because of course there are business related matters. I said I'm not worried about that. Those things will iron themselves out. Those things will take care of themselves. But what I'm getting at here, as far as with her and abandonment, I share with her that I will need, once I make this move, I will need approximately 30 days. So there's going to be 30 days approximately without any contact. I just wanted to take some time to myself for self-care, which I also encourage clients to do for obvious reasons. Take some time for yourself. We're going through so much as we're progressing towards sustained active recovery. It's okay to be selfish every once in a while. So I want to take, whether it be a couple of hours or even a couple of days. I just want to take a couple of days to take care of me. I'm doing so much to take care of others, and I'm prioritizing recovery. So I want to do something positive for myself. So I did share with her, I do have intentions. I feel as though at that particular time, I've worked for many years without a break. And there was a period of time in which I've worked literally 7 days a week. I'm working north of 60 hours a week for 7 days a week. So that was something I felt as though I had not, at that particular time, I had not fully recovered from. But going back to this client and abandonment, and at least the features of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis that she did present with, I did share with her there's going to be roughly that 1 month period. I just wanted some time to myself, some time to transition into my private practice and get that off of the ground. I still had to get a building, get that paperwork taken care of, get that documentation taken care of. I still wanted to take some time and dive into the location, dive into geographical considerations, look along the lines of public transportation, easy access to the interstates and highways and matters along those lines. I wanted to make sure that the spot I picked was going to be as close to practical as possible for clients. And I just shared with her I needed some time to process all equations, all possibilities, all factors, and matters along those lines. I wanted to make sure the neighborhood was as safe as possible. I wanted to make certain that wherever people were coming to see me for face-to-face, individual, group, or family counseling sessions, it wasn't going to be in a neighborhood in which anyone perhaps has some previous involvements during their struggle with active addiction. And of course, that was probably going to be virtually impossible to do as far as taking care of everyone. But this was something I still wanted to at least try to hypothesize from a mathematical formula perspective. But she had spoken to me about how she struggled. She felt as though that I was using that as an excuse to leave her. So, and I did give everyone during this time that I needed for myself personally as well as for transitional purposes. I did share with everyone how they could reach me, of course, under emergency settings. And remain mindful, I shared that this particular client was doing very well programmatically. I was not concerned about her experiencing any about her falling back into active addiction during our 30 days apart. And of course that's always a possibility with everyone, but as far as if I had to list everyone from 1 through 50, I definitely would not have put her anywhere near the top 10, top 15, top 20, perhaps even top 30. She definitely would have been closer to that bottom, that number 50, if not number 50. I was wholeheartedly confident in the foundational program that she had in place, and she was going to be okay without engaging with me for 1 month. But she was actually, with me, perhaps not diving more into the features of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis that she at least presented with periodically. She was one who was in constant contact with me. She was talking about being on the verge of falling back into active addiction. She was sharing me about suicidal ideation and matters along those lines. And what I just communicating with her, just engaging with her, I came to the realization that what she was doing was, with her feeling as though that I was utilizing that 30 days or that 1 month period to just transition away from her perspective. She felt as though that I was just being nice about it, telling her that I needed some time to get my private practice off the ground. She thought, because we've done so much over the course of a long period of time, she was under the impression that I had enough with her from a professional standpoint, and I just found that excuse to walk away. So what she was doing, she was engaging in efforts to avoid the actual or perceived abandonment that was taking place, talking about falling back into active addiction, talking about suicidal ideations and matters along those lines. Once I've at least assured her that we are still going to work together, we haven't scheduled a date, I gave her a date. That date, as far as with me, I was not wholeheartedly certain that I was going to be ready to operate. But I did give her a date. And I talked with her about how I like to make my preparations for various counseling sessions, regardless of regardless of the format, regardless of the modality, whether that be individual, group, or family. So I just gave her a date. So we're going to meet through telehealth on this particular date. But what I did as far as that particular date, I said I'm also going to use this to get back on the ball. I'm going to use this date to push myself to move forward. I did come across some issues as far as with finding a physical location and matters along those lines. So what I did with that date, that was to help her as well, but I also gave myself a date. It's okay. There are people still counting on you. We've had it long enough. There are some external factors that are outside of my control, but we can at least get back to work. We can at least utilize telehealth. So what I did with her is I gave her that date. I was set. I was good to go as far as on my end, but I just wanted to make certain that the perceived abandonment that she was experiencing, that was at least alleviated. She did admit to me that she was not experiencing any form of relapse-related thoughts or feelings. She was not feeling suicidal, but she felt as though just by her knowing how serious I am about the work I do, she felt as though her mentioning those two things that would get my attention. And this is something that, as we got back together, as we started working back together again, even though we've just been separated as far as professionally for 1 month, this is something where we dove further into her at least presenting features of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. In the end, we felt as though that she did not meet diagnosable criteria, utilizing the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and other contemporary peer-reviewed literature as far as sufficiently diagnosing someone. We were comfortable with continuing with excluding that particular diagnosis from her documentation, from treatment planning, but also we just felt as though that even though she did struggle with various forms of abandonment, similar to the manner in which someone diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, we just felt as though that this was at least time to address her abandonment-related issues pro-socially. And even though she did not meet the full diagnosable criteria for a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, she at least presented with features that were extremely similar to someone, or she was on the verge of presenting or endorsing a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. When it comes to relationships with romantic partners, there could be an idealization that manifests itself immediately. Such dramatic shifts generally reflects disillusionment, conceivably triggered by transforming perspectives, goals, and aspirations. We're talking along the lines of romantic relationships, intimate partners, and matters along those lines. We have a relationship in which there are expectations or respective guidelines that have been agreed upon, such as not dating outside the relationship and matters along those lines. So we're taking partner L and we're taking partner M. Partner L is at least presenting with features of a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. Partner M perhaps may not have reached a point in which they've decided that the relationship had run its proverbial course and must come to an end. But partner M has expressed that, particular things are a little bit concerning. Perhaps we should at least look into either taking some time apart if we've reached that level of development as far as our relationship. Maybe we even need to pursue some form of counseling. Partner L, with at least who's endorsing characteristics of borderline personality disorder, may find themselves in a situation in which they're frantic and impulsive and say, you know what, okay, to stop you from leaving me, I'll do whatever it takes, whether that be allowing you to see others outside the relationship. If we want to explore different things from a sexual intercourse related matters, do you want me to pay for more things? Should I shower you with more gifts? Do you want to spend less time away? Whatever it takes for you to not abandon me, for you to not end this relationship, I am willing to do. Part of M could just be looking at things as far as it's not that extreme. I'm not looking to dominate the relationship. I'm not looking to be the dominating feature. I'm not looking to take control of the relationship. I view us as equal partners. Partner L could be looking at matters along the lines of, okay, I have to do a little more. I have to do a lot more. I have to sacrifice, essentially, to save this relationship because I cannot see you go away. So now partner M, so this disconnect is perhaps even a little bit it's becoming even more broadened, so to speak, because now we're introducing psychiatric considerations. We're introducing a potential mental health disorder diagnosis, or at least features of a respective diagnosis. This is why I feel as though it is my job as a board certified family recovery specialist, as a certified allied addiction practitioner, as someone who in which have those credentials of which I could speak multiple languages from a sociological standpoint very fluently. I feel as though it is my job to bring partners in. It is my job to make certain that those who are close to someone whom I'm providing clinical services for, it is my job to make certain that their loved ones at least have some sort of foundational baseline of what to expect when various episodes present themselves, because of course no, we should not be subjected to various forms of behavior, but at least I've learned from professional and personal experiences, at least if someone has some sort of foundational baseline, and my intentions are not to make them an expert by no means, but at least to put them in a position in which they can understand what's taking place. So if and when these matters happen, they're not looking to bolt. They can at least work with the person. They can be more empathetic. They can reach out to myself. They can reach out to someone within that center of influence. While we're helping this person, in this case, partner L, while we're collectively helping this person gradually but methodically and effectively make advancement towards diminishing features of their respective borderline personality disorder diagnosis. Unfortunately, when it comes to a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, impulsivity and instability from a psychological standpoint, those are two of an array of factors that correspond significantly with that respective diagnosis. There was a time in which I was providing clinical services for a woman. She was enrolled in the graduate program. This particular program, it was a very prestigious program in graduate school. This was going to put her in a position to obtain that entrepreneurship that she was seeking, that she was aspiring for. During this particular time, she was very proud. I met with her monthly for individual counseling sessions. They were generally later in the evening once she was done, and she was also working full time as well. Once she was finished with working full time and attending her full time program as far as graduate school, I would meet with her, and she was always very consistent as far as showing me her grades. So where I'm going at was she had a perfect grade point average of 4.0, and she was approaching the end. During this time, she was writing her master's thesis, and it looked as though, and this is something that I've gone through actually twice. I do have a Master of Science degree, which I'm proud of, and I also have a Master of Arts degree, both of which require their own respective, very extensive master's theses. So where I'm going at here was I was able to empathize with her from the perspective of walking in those shoes, even though many years ago I was able to walk in those shoes as her. So I know how that goes, even moving forward with writing and drafting and getting my doctoral dissertation off the ground. So with those three publications that I put together, there was a lot of editing. There was a lot of submissions. I felt as though this was the best work I could possibly do. There were a lot of submissions, and of course a lot of returns, so to speak, as far as red ink, pretty much telling me that I need to do a lot better. But I understood at that point in my academic career, I understood that those documentations must be as close to perfect as possible, particularly because they're going to be a representation essentially of the university for the unforeseen future. So I never took things personally. This was actually something she didn't experience. A lot of the edits were very minimal, at least from what she showed me, and she was moving along very methodically. Where I'm going at here, as far as her impulsiveness, she had she not only took time away from programming, she disenrolled from programming and she withdrew from the university. She had shared that with me. as far as during one of our individual counseling sessions. So, of course, I'm diving into, from my understanding, nothing was wrong academically. So, what's happening in life? As far as what she shared, relationship with her loved ones was on the up and up. Things were going well with her intimate partner. She had just got promoted during our time apart. Like I mentioned, we only met once monthly. She had just, so career advancement was happening for her. She got a bank loan, her bank loan approved to start her business. I was a little bit taken aback, of course, not even thinking about her borderline personality disorder diagnosis, because at least during our time together from a client center standpoint, we focused more so on her opioid use disorder severe on maintenance therapy and her tobacco use disorder severe diagnosis. We focused on those because her history of opioid abuse and tobacco abuse, they've triggered and amplified health related matters that we were addressing. So what we were doing was we were utilizing a lot of solution focused brief therapy and motivation enhancement therapy to address her coping with and progressing through those medical challenges that she was dealing with. And also, we were working towards at least making an effort to keep depressive related matters from manifesting themselves and overwhelming her. So, as far as the attention that we did not spend on her borderline personality disorder diagnosis, the level of impulsiveness and decision making that she reached, that was something that, from a collaborative standpoint, that was something that perhaps we should have spent more time addressing, because we ignored the impulsiveness that correlated with that respective diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. She just got herself out of school. She was doing well, perfect grade point average. Her master's thesis at least appeared as though it was on the verge of being finalized and going through publications, and she was going to receive that graduate degree and get her business off the ground like she had aspired to do. But this was something, and so when she got herself out of school, unfortunately, despite our efforts to keep depressive symptomatology at bay, her leaving school ultimately was the triggering antecedent as far as her at least endorsing features of some sort of depressive related diagnosis. Now, the university she was attending, once someone's disenrolled or withdrawal from programming, they must essentially go through the entire process. And I had no idea about this, but I met her after actually enrolling into the school. That program had a very extensive waiting list because it was such a small program. She was going to have to at least wait 2 to 3 years before she could even get back into programming. And at least based off of what she shared with me, there was going to be a significant probability she would have to start the entire program over. Now, I've been to more than one school, more than one college and university throughout my professional career. So my understanding was that grades don't expire, particularly if it hasn't been a significant period of time. I've transferred credits from school to school. I've even used credits that perhaps, because early in my career I've switched majors. I've even used credits to build towards to see if I was even close to obtaining a degree I left behind. But I've just figured, why not? Why not finish something that I started? Of course, I'm sure there's something I can use. I am a huge advocate of ongoing learning. I'm sure there's some assignment or some publication or something that I could use that could perhaps lead me in the direction of potentially getting some sort of group-oriented programming off of the ground. Amazingly so, I was watching the 4th chapter of my doctoral dissertation, and this is how I guess I've been blessed in this regard. I heard 2 words: direct supervision. I was watching a correctional documentary, and just hearing the words direct supervision used essentially as a compound word, that literally helped me write my entire 4th chapter of my doctoral dissertation. And at that point, I reached a point in which all of the research I've done and accumulated throughout the years, I had already exhausted myself. I figured the 5th chapter was just wrapping things up, but I said, okay, I'm going to need something for my 4th chapter. Of course, I can't repeat myself from whatever's been written. So where I'm going at was, okay, I'm going to need something. And that helped me write those approximately 50 pages as far as my the fourth chapter of my doctoral dissertation. But where I'm going at was, and essentially, that we shouldn't lose credits, particularly if it hasn't been a significant period of time. But she was convinced that this could be psychiatric instability or impulsiveness, or her psychological dysregulation having bearing on her decision making or her cognitions or cognitive related matters. But I was asking her, I said, we should probably look into this. I don't think we should have to start over, perhaps go through the documentation process, but just to lose all of the work you've already done. But of course, I had no affiliation with that university, so I just took her for what it was. But then that comes back into, I didn't want to ask her, why did we leave? I mean, we left, it's already done. There's no point in rubbing salt on that wound, so to speak. But it was like, did we give this any thought? Were we aware of what we could be doing? Or did episodes of that borderline personality disorder just overwhelm her to the point where she felt as though that to soothe herself, it was very important for her to withdraw from that program, despite the success that she endured throughout programming, including, at least with her disclosing and presenting as though her master's thesis was going pretty well, was moving accordingly in the direction of publication and graduation. We have now reached a point in this presentation in which we will focus on histrionic personality disorder. Individuals presenting with features of a histrionic personality disorder diagnosis demonstrate an extensive and excessive illustration of emotionality and attention-seeking behavior. These demonstrations of histrionics have generally commenced by early adulthood and are illustrated during a variety of contexts. We're talking occupational setting, at home, on the campus of an educational institution. We're talking socially with friends and matters along those lines. There is a heightened degree of uncomfortability or sensations of unappreciation when one is not the proverbial or literal center of attention. Oftentimes, there is an amplified degree of liveliness or dramatization, particularly when there are new acquaintances around, which are presented with enthusiasm, openness, and perhaps even flirtatiousness. When there are feelings of not having the collective attention concentrated onto them, efforts to say or do something are resorted to in order to transform the trajectory of the dynamics. A histrionic personality disorder diagnosis may find the individual viewing relationships as more intimate as they are, such as taking the professionalism and kindness of a practitioner or some other form of professional as an invitation to commence a friendship. I worked with a client who did have a history, as far as a documented history, of carrying on an ongoing histrionic personality disorder diagnosis. When I started working with this client, she was already heavily involved with the criminal justice system, and she had recently was switched caseloads as far as with probation agents or probation officers. She was she would start off now as far as her involvement with the criminal justice system, that had nothing to do with her probation officer. So anytime we addressed that particular aspect of her treatment plan during individual counseling sessions, she would direct matters towards the kindness and the appreciation of the dynamics between her and her probation officer. With me remaining mindful of her histrionic personality disorder diagnosis and me understanding that such a diagnosis could position someone to take things into a different stratosphere, so to speak, as far as a professional relationship, she had shared with me that she felt as though that this was the kind of gentleman, and this was a female client and a male probation officer. She had shared with me that she thought that there was something there romantically that she should perhaps dive into. Now, what I did initially, I didn't focus on professional boundaries and matters along those lines and how he could. I'm not too certain about the rules and regulations of that dynamics, but I'm pretty certain that there are fraternization policies in place as far as a probation officer dating a client. But what I did there was I addressed that later, but what I focused on was I dove into positioning the client to intellectualize precisely why she feels as though there is something there professionally, romantically, excuse me. So what she did there was she talked about me knowing that she's had an extensive history of involvement with the criminal justice system, including incarceration, county and state correctional facilities, engagements with parole boards, working with parole agents and parole officers, and matters along those lines. She's talking to me about this was the first time that anyone along those boundaries, as far as authoritative professional figures in her life, treated her with respect. So I brought that back into counselors and therapists, psychiatrists, and psychologists that she's worked with. She said that you all are putting me in that box, so to speak. She said you all are supposed to be nice. You all have to be nice. I did remind her that, of course, being nice and being understanding and being empathetic, that is something that it does at least make the job easier. But I share with her that I don't think I don't think that I ever recall any mentor, any professor, or any steward had ever told me that I have to be nice. Of course, I'm naturally nice in the professional setting, and of course, I choose to be nice. It does make things a lot more productive. But I've reminded her that said that we don't necessarily have to be nice. That's just something that perhaps happens organically based upon someone's clinical approach and things of that nature as far as the interventions that are being used. But she talked about the differences as far as our professional approaches compared to a practitioner of the criminal justice system. She shared with me that from her perspective that they are supposed to be authoritative, be dictative, be mean essentially. But this was the first person that was actually nice towards her. She shared with me that he was able to fulfill his obligations without utilizing any form of profanity, without ridiculing her, without name calling, and things along those lines. I talked to her about that. I said he must have had some very extensive training, or perhaps even just something personally in his life. Because no matter what someone's position is, no one deserves to be ridiculed, be name called, and things along those lines. I said he is actually sound like he is actually, as far as along those lines, he is perhaps one of the more professionally sound individuals that you've worked with as far as the criminal justice system. As far as she said, she had talked about when she did produce a positive urine screening, rather than threatening to send her to get her back reincarcerated. He had said the first thing he had said out of his mouth, let's get with Dr. Curry and let's see what's going on here and let's see what he would like to recommend because we really want his input. I told her that we are a part of her multi-systemic team, and that's actually what should happen. It doesn't necessarily have to happen, but that is how things should go. If you've been doing well, and from a toxicological standpoint, it's been ascertained that you've been involved recently with some form of chemical abuse, you're probably going through something emotionally. There could be some form of psychological dysregulation. So you're not in a state to be threatened with incarceration. You didn't go out there and purposely commit some form of criminality. You could be going through something. So yes, let's get the multi-systemic team together. But she had told me that when this happened throughout her past, there were always immediate threats towards, as far as directing towards reincarceration, uh, having parental custodianship perhaps altered in some manner. And I told her that yeah, it sounded like he was doing things on a more heightened professional level, rather than threatening you, rather than putting you in a condition because I'm sure you already feel badly enough about what took place. You had to produce this urine screening. You already feel badly enough. So let's get your multi-systemic team together and let's work towards positioning you to be that best version of yourself that you can be. And I've told her that there's been times where I will be notified that XYZ client has been reincarcerated, will be away for the next 3 to 5 years. And it's like, wow, I wish I could have had the courtesy to know what's been taking place, particularly if there's been something that's been happening psychiatrically or something along the lines of chemical abuse, which the vast majority of the times, at least from my experiences, that was the case, so to speak. So it would have been nice to have been involved with these meetings and these proceedings. So I told her that if we could, let's look at things as this probation officer is essentially doing the best job that he can possibly be based upon of his professional skill level, rather than leaving hints that there is a potential for a romantic relationship. But that's something that correlates with the histrionic personality disorder diagnosis, such as taking the professionalism or kindness of an individual, such as a probation officer who has a, as far as a job title, have a reputation of being that sort of authoritative figure. This person is being professional and kind and legitimately wanting what's best for you for whatever reason, whether they're motivated by something that happened to them or their loved ones personally, or this is something they feel as though should happen professionally, or they groom in this particular manner, rather than look at things as far as this being an invitation to at least commit some sort of friendship or romantic engagement. This person is merely just doing their job to the best of their ability. Persisting along the lines of addressing a histrionic personality disorder diagnosis, other personality disorders may conceivably be confused with a histrionic personality disorder diagnosis, such as someone endorsing features of a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. An individual at least endorsing characteristics of a histrionic personality disorder diagnosis could potentially be easily influenced, perhaps compelled to have involvement with something they have wholehearted awareness of there being possible correlating consequences. This is one of an assortment of diagnosable attributes of a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. I would like to shift gears into the direction of what's referred to as a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. Grandiosity, the prioritization of the need for admiration, and presenting with an unempathetic approach towards others is an essential characteristic of a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. Individuals endorsing a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis presents with a heightened degree of self-importance. There is routinely an overestimation of abilities, including the inflation of accomplishments. Something along these lines, we can take someone, they had a very promising background as far as athletically. What happened here was this person they could have had an opportunity that we're going to talk about. We're going to go into the lane of football. This person could have had an opportunity to play football at the professional level. They dominated on the amateur level, including high school, including college. But as far as getting drafted into a professional league, that didn't happen immediately. So what took place here is through connections, through networking, they were privy to know when private workouts, when private trials were happening, so they were able to travel around from facility to facility, and they were able to get these tryouts. So what happens here is, rather than saying that they traveled around whenever they talk about these particular stories, they can over embellish, so to speak, rather than saying that through networking they were able to show up and they were able to speak the terminological language or mention a certain name at the gate as far as when confronted by security, they were able to finagle, so to speak, their way into the workout and also have the workout since they're already there. Rather than admit that part, which nothing wrong with that, that's still a major accomplishment just to at least be positioned to try out for a professional athletic team and possibly position yourself to make money that could impact your family from a cross-generational standpoint. This person could tell whomever is listening that they were invited to try out for this particular team, to try out for that particular team. Things did work out, but there were some, whether it be an injury that they're perhaps over embellishing or some sort of issues as far as contracting. They could say that the reasoning why things didn't work out, not because I didn't get selected, which is still nothing wrong with that either, but because of a decision that I made myself. I decided that it was best for me to not play professional football. And again, I'm just using that as an example of how someone endorsing features of a narcissistic personality disorder could find themselves routinely engaging in the overestimation of their abilities, including the inflation of what they did accomplish. an individual could become extremely surprised and perhaps even taken aback when there is notification that those surrounding them do not feel the same way about them, viewing them differently, perhaps not holding them to that same high regard that they hold themselves. Now, I'm a huge believer in and advocate of a heightened sense of self esteem. I'm a huge advocate of self belief. This is something that I practice myself, personally and as well as professionally. There was a time in which I was serving with the United States Army. A goal of mine was to become a commissioned officer. Since I went into the United States Army immediately following high school, and the colleges and universities I attended did not have what's referred to as a Reserve Officer Training Corps program, my only path towards becoming a commissioned officer was through what's called Officer Candidate School. That was literally the only path that I had at the time. There were some other options I could have taken, but as far as not separating from the armed forces for a short period of time and taking things a different direction, that was my only path as far as the sustainment of service with the armed forces. I was in a room. I did accomplish that goal. It took a very long time because of other matters as far as the global war on terrorism, as far as a special assignment I was on, and matters along those lines. I did have to wait my time, which I understood, which I respected, but it was still something that I was not going to allow myself to let go until that goal was accomplished, which is something that was very important to me. But the nature of where I'm going, as far as correlating that with a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, I did become that commissioned officer. I was sitting in a room with other commissioned officers. There were badges that I had on, which showed everyone else that there was a time in which I was referred to as an enlisted soldier or a non-commissioned soldier, and there was a time in which I was a non-commissioned officer. So I was just sharing my stories, and when I had the great privilege of being a detailed field recruiter for a short period of time that did get extended, which I have no idea why. I thought I did a horrible job as a detailed field recruiter, but I got extended for 2 years. Perhaps that was my punishment for not doing a good job. But either way, I'm definitely very fortunate, and that part of my life did change the trajectory of who I am as a person, personally as well as professionally. It changed, it molded me to become who I am today. But bringing things back to becoming a commissioned officer with the United States Army and someone presenting with features of a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. I was in a room with literally other commissioned officers, and I knew these individuals, and for some reason the subject came up about how commissions were earned. There were a couple of us in the room who attended officer candidate school, so we disclosed that. There were a couple who did go through what's referred to as Reserve Officer Training Corps during their time in undergraduate school, so that's how they earned their commission. There were some who were specialists as far as being medical doctors, attorneys, and matters along those lines. So them, I knew about this during my time as being a detail recruiter. They were what's referred to as direct commission because of their professional achievements as far as being medical doctors and being practicing attorneys and having the appropriate level of licensure and matters along those lines. They went through direct commissioning. There's also commissioning through the United States, the United States Military Academy, one of the most prestigious schools, not just in the United States of America, but internationally. And there was one person. He was very proud to say that he was a graduate and earned his commission through the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York. So what took place there was he said that with, and I looked at him in his eyes because I knew where things were going just from my time as being a detailed recruiter and also my time as a non-commissioned officer or as an enlisted soldier prior to becoming a commissioned officer. I knew where he was going with that. The other officers in the room, the other commissioned officers were not as experienced as far as time in service as he and I. As far as time in service, I had the most, even though I was the highest ranking in the room, I had the most time in service from my time as an enlisted soldier or a non-commissioned officer, and he was number two in the room as far as time in service. He was not the highest ranking in the room. That actually fell into the lines of the medical doctor who had a direct commissioning date that was a few weeks earlier than the attorney. So by time and grade, which supersedes time and service, he was actually the highest ranking person in the room. The point being was this person said that he was a proud graduate, which he should be, of one of the most prestigious universities internationally. And what he did was he looked around the room, and I looked at his affect. He was waiting for that wow, like, you are the greatest in here. He was waiting for that. When no one else, not out of disrespect, of course, but when no one else acknowledged that, everyone just went along with their same affect, their same mannerisms. He was very disappointed, and he looked like he wanted to say something. But I recall him just grabbing his belongings and walking out of the room. I did follow him, not to make sure he was okay emotionally. He would be all right. But I did follow him just to laugh at him. I wanted to say that, hey man, that really bothered you that no one had asked you about your time in West Point, New York. I did follow him out there, and he was extremely upset. And I said, hey, we as far as he pretty much said that he had the toughest route to becoming a commissioned officer. I had shared with him that all of our rules are challenging. Going through the path of officer candidate school at the time, I was not just a non-commissioned officer when I went through officer candidate school. I reminded him that I was a senior non-commissioned officer, and I do have to admit, I was under the impression that I was going to go to the school and it was just going to be me hanging out there for the duration of the course. I figured that I literally believe I would have, because of all my time in service, all of the training I've gone through, all of the courses I've completed, all of the awards I've racked up, including being a soldier of the month on multiple occasions, all of the boards I've gone through, going to combat twice, leading operations literally in combat twice, despite not being the highest ranking during the operation or on the ground, literally having everyone look to me and asking me, what should we do here? Despite all of that, I thought this course was going to be a cakewalk. I have to admit that, but it was very challenging. Each day was very challenging. And I said, wow, this was a lot tougher than I anticipated. Not that I would have had to have made any other adjustments. It was just more so from my perspective as far as going there. I went there with the impression I was just going to show up there and just hang out there. I wouldn't have to have any effort. I wouldn't have to try because from my standpoint, I felt as though I've already done all of this in real time. So I should be able to just walk through it. Point being was I reminded him that every path is tough, whether it's direct commissioning, whether it's officer candidate school, whether it's reserve officer training corps, whether it's through time spent going through coursework and matters along those lines with West Point, New York. I said we all come with a very unique, distinguishing background and perspective. But at the end of the day, regardless of how we got here, we are still commissioned officers. We are still amongst a very small percentage of the population in which we can call ourselves that. And we should be very proud of that. And as far as how you got here, shouldn't matter. But despite me sharing all of that, despite me actually, which I have to admit, I was expecting him to say, wow, you know what, Lieutenant Curry, at the time I was referred to as Lieutenant Curry, I was expecting for him to say, you are right. Maybe I shouldn't be so bad. Maybe I should return back to the room rather than separating myself. He said to me that, and of course I can't use the language he used, but he pretty much said that he doesn't care about what I say. His path was the toughest, and he wants to be addressed as so. And I said, wow, that actually, I said, you are at least presenting with features of a narcissistic personality, of someone with a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. And when I said that to him, he said, you may be correct there, but either way, I just want you all to acknowledge that my path towards becoming a commissioned officer was the hardest. And for the remainder of our time together during that day, he did isolate himself and he would not engage with us until he was told that his role, so to speak, was the toughest. And that was very important to him. That did cause some form of friction within the group. I found that hilarious. This was not a clinical environment, so I was able to enjoy myself and just laugh at what I thought was pretty funny as far as we are really going to be upset with our counterparts because they won't admit or they won't acknowledge how rough your role towards becoming a commissioned officer was, despite us all saying that all of our paths were very challenging. We all thought that this was going to be, regardless of which approach you took, there were obstacles along the way in which we all thought about, wow, is this really what I want? We've all thought about giving up along the path, myself included, being that experienced combat veteran who was a senior non-commissioned officer going through this introductory officer-related course. There were times in which I literally thought about packing my belongings, walking out to my vehicle and saying, you know what, this was enough for me. But through resiliency, I remained and I persisted and I was able to accomplish the goal. But as far as a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, that's something that could be as far as someone holding themselves to a higher standard and perhaps viewing themselves a little differently when that's not reciprocated by others. That could have some bearing on their behavioral mannerisms, on their decision making, and how they interact with such crowd moving forward. The psychological complications correlating with a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis could position an individual to endure psychiatric episodes when faced with criticism, including constructive criticism in a professional environment. Returning to the commissioned officer I just spoke of, I just gave an example of our encounter that we've had. He presented as though he was experiencing some form of features that correlated with what's referred to as an intermittent explosive disorder diagnosis. He looked as though he was really looking to act out as far as destroy property, perhaps even uh, attack us. It was very apparent that he was extremely upset, which is one of the reasons why I felt as though I should at least follow him out just to make certain that he's okay. Because there was as we went along with this day, he was he was taxed he was tasked to present a presentation, and with him speaking of how I'm just paraphrasing, but by him speaking of how he was literally the best amongst all of us commissioned officers, when his presentation was concluded, perhaps he was shaken a little intellectually or from an articulation standpoint. There was a joke amongst the room saying, "Wow, that's the best you can do, West Point." And we're all service members, so as far as joking around with each other and giving each other a hard time, that isn't something that's extraordinary. And that was just a joke. There was his presentation was, I felt that it was flawless. I got a lot out of it. I remember saying to myself, like, "Wow." I used that as motivation. I said, I need to get on his level. But it was just a joke by one of the other members of the group, and he became very upset. He charged towards the person. I did step in between. I normally that isn't something I've done in my life as far as getting myself involved with physical altercations. When I did touch him, I didn't feel as though that he had the kinetic energy or the force as if he was committing to do something, but just by charging, perhaps he did. As he took those couple of steps before I intervened, perhaps he was. And then he just quickly calmed himself down and realized that, okay, this could induce some trouble that's not worth it. But despite that, just to charge into the direction of someone because they just said, well, along those lines of, wow, that's the best that you can do, and you're supposed to be the quote unquote best amongst us. Again, his presentation was flawless, but just already being in that, with him already being in that frame of mind, and we are in a professional environment, he's already in a frame of mind that he isn't, that he was not being viewed or held on that same level in which he held himself, just by that joke being mentioned. And of course, the entire room did erupt with laughter, but the only person who did not find it funny was him. Now, going back to his at least features of, and of course, I did not work with him clinically, so I didn't have any idea of any personality disorders or psychiatric challenges that he perhaps did have. But with him presenting features of a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, everyone else, we all had to give our own presentation, and we did have breaks, and these presentations were expected to last at least 1 hour. This was an all-day affair, which spanned the course of a few days together during this peer-related training. No one else had anything to say, at least out loud, about anyone else's presentation, but it was pretty apparent that we were all eagerly anticipating his because we wanted to see what the best of the best is supposed to look like. And as I'm looking around the room, as there were breaks, so to speak, in the block of instruction, I said, yeah, everyone definitely has something to say, and at least one person here will give him a hard time. I hope he's at least able to have a sense of humor about it because we are all, at the end of the day, regardless of us giving each other a hard time, we want to make sure that we're all successful because we're all about to leave this training and go back and train the large masses. So we all want to do a great job. But as far as when he initially told us how he earned his commission, and that wasn't met with the wow factor in which he assumed, it was pretty obvious over the course of that 72 hours together that he wanted to be elsewhere and he did not enjoy the training. As far as any networking that was not done, as far as any once we had breaks and things along those lines, as far as grabbing a cup of coffee or sharing meals together, that was not happening. He had went out amongst himself in the city in which none of us were living or even been to before. He just went out amongst himself. He did not want to have part in what was taking place. He had already made that decision, perhaps based upon at least features of a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, that if we're not going to praise him and his accomplishments and his abilities, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with us. And that's what he sustained over the course of that, during the course of that 72 hours together. The next personality disorder that we are going to address is avoidant personality disorder. Social inhibition, inadequacy related sensations, and hypersensitivity towards negative evaluation are instrumental characteristics endorsed by an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis. If we can identify one particular theme as far as the personality disorders that we've addressed up to this point in the presentation, just talking along the lines of hypersensitivity, or as far as perceived variations of attacks when it comes to self evaluations and matters along those lines, those seem to be a central core theme of the personality disorders that we've addressed up to this point. There are purposeful efforts to avoid significant interpersonal interaction with others because of concerns about experiencing criticism, disapproval, or perhaps even rejection in this particular matter, with that correlating with the premise or the actual name from a terminological standpoint of avoidant personality disorder. In professional environments, career advancement opportunities could be turned down out of concerns about not having the adeptness to handle additional responsibilities. When I was conducting the research to put this presentation together and I was diving into avoidant personality disorder and corresponding attributes, looking into what I wanted to add, what was essential, what perhaps didn't need to be included, this particular bullet point here, and I want to repeat it. In professional environments, career advancement opportunities could be turned down out of concerns about not having the adeptness to handle additional responsibilities adequately. That reminded me of a very dear friend of mine during my time with the United States Army that I've met. At this particular time, I didn't want to use this time to go into rank structure, but he had 10 years of service. And let's just say he was a couple, just to be kind. He was a couple of pay grades short of where he should have been. He had the knowledge. That was very apparent. He had the charisma. He had the leadership and managerial characteristics. He had the time in service, with me mentioning 10 years. The people in which that were a part of his team or his squad combined did not have the collective years as far as time of service as him. There were promotional boards that he would be assigned to each month, but he would turn them down. And for the life of me, and this, I was very young. I just turned 19 years old. I just graduated the best high school on the planet, West Philadelphia High School. I just completed initial entry training, but I was learning about rank structure. I was learning about advancement boards, and saying to myself, that's something that I can see for myself over the horizon. But what I was diving into was I could not figure out why he would turn down career advancement, what was bothersome to him, in addition to the increased level of responsibilities, in addition to the prestige that comes along with transitioning from what's referred to as a junior enlisted soldier into becoming a non-commissioned officer. Why was he turning that down? If not all of that, the significant increase in pay. He was turning down all of that. And this individual, I think about him periodically. Something triggers that whenever topics come up as far as someone potentially turning something down. As far as career advancement, I think about him and I wonder, especially with my knowledge of personality disorders, particularly avoidant personality disorder, could he have presented with or perhaps endorsed wholeheartedly an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis? And could that have had bearing on him not feeling as though, despite how intellectually, tactically, and technically sound he was, despite all of that, could that particular personality disorder diagnosis that he possibly endorsed had bearing on him rejecting month after month for years at a time, rejected him, put him in a position to reject career advancement? And the unfortunate part of that is, with the United States Army, at least during that particular time, if you did not reach a particular rank, you were obligated to leave. You were obligated to be separated. And this is something that happened to him. So he had, and there is no severance package or benefit package that you could lean upon for life. So ultimately, he hit that 10-year mark. He was separated from the armed forces, and this was many years ago. I'm not certain. I have not stayed abreast as far as contemporary policies, but at least during that time, I'm not sure if he was given the opportunity to re-enlist to get back in, but at least during that time, his 10-year mark hit, and he was asked to pack his bags and walk away with a thank you and a pat on the back. But it was just like, why did he turn everything down? Why did he walk away with nothing? What was his purpose? Or did he possibly endorse an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis? There are predominant complications affiliated with an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis when it comes to social and or occupational atmospheres. Individuals endorsing an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis present with low self-esteem, coupled with significant hypersensitivity towards rejection, which makes matters problematical from an interpersonal standpoint. This is reasoning behind why rehabilitative treatment could be used to help diminish features of an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis due to recognition and implementation of pro-social coping and replacement skills to manage correlating circumstances. One thing in particular I like to lean upon from an intervention standpoint whenever working with someone presenting with or endorsing an avoidant personality disorder diagnosis is solution-focused brief therapy. And as far as the correlating premises associated with solution-focused brief therapy, it aligns with the words of that particular intervention. We have a challenge. We're concentrating on a respective, realistic solution. So what can we do collaboratively to put our heads together to come up with a solution that we're not just going to agree upon, document, and walk away from in a clinical environment? We have intentions on utilizing. So whenever I'm working with someone and they're talking about being extremely hypersensitive as far as rejection, they're talking about their low self-esteem. What I'm doing here is I'm identifying with the person that we as human beings, there are certain things, just in general, just as far as being a human being, that we are somewhat or perhaps hypersensitive to. Rejection isn't something that we look forward to outside of any psychological considerations. So no one wakes up in the morning and say, you know what, I want to experience some form of instrumental rejection today. What I do here is I say, okay, let's just say for some reason rejection takes place. How do we handle that? What do we learn from that? What can we do better? What was supposed to happen? What did happen? What is something that we can take away from as far as being positive? What's something that's negative? What can we do to take control over the situation? What can we do differently to make certain or to at least increase the likelihood of the outcome being somewhat more favorably in our regard when, if and when there is a next time, if and when this situation perpetuates or duplicates or replicates itself in the near or distant future. Before I move on to dependent personality disorder, I would like to briefly discuss the very first time from a diagnosable standpoint I administered this respective diagnosis. I remember this very well because of the reaction, and this is a diagnosis that, at least from my clinical experiences, have not been, at least as far as myself, I've not been involved with as much in comparison to other personality disorder diagnoses or other clinical disorder diagnoses, period. I recall sharing with the client that based upon our time together in various assessments and evaluations, I would like to administer, I believe it was a tertiary diagnosis, but that's insignificant as of now. A tertiary diagnosis of dependent personality disorder. And as soon as I said that, I shared with her that I was about to share with her that I was making some rearrangements as far as the categorization of her diagnosis, as far as primary, secondary, tertiary, supplementary, and matters along those lines. She had she was always very respectful, but she had it was pretty clear that she was very offended by the term dependent. And she illustrated this by talking about how she's in school full time, she's employed full time, she's taking care of each of her children on her own. She pays all of her bills punctually, she pays her taxes, she has her own vehicle, she doesn't rely upon anyone for anything. And I never like to cut anyone off as they're sharing, even if they're going off on a banter such as that. But I was trying to let her know that your level of independency does not have anything to do with this particular diagnosis. And as I was explaining to her the features, I said to her, rather than me just spitting this all from my knowledge and my experience, I actually went and grabbed the fifth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and I had her read everything herself to at least have her see where I came to the conclusion that she is endorsing a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. But she was so irate. And we've always had very pleasant, very productive individual, group, and family counseling sessions. That one was probably the only non-productive counseling session, regardless of the modality that we've had together. Perhaps that was my fault as far as the manner in which I led with a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. And ever since then, what I did was, anytime I'm talking about this respective diagnosis, I made sure that I led with letting the client know that the following diagnosis that I'd like to discuss has nothing to do with your independence. I am cognizant of this. I am cognizant of that. I'll lean upon affirmations to make certain, because the term dependent personality, that can be a little bit scary if someone's not in a position to actually listen to the corresponding features. I didn't want to share that as far as diving into a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. And remaining along the lines of with that particular client, what I did, I actually I printed off each page of the fifth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that focused on dependent personality disorder. I printed her off multiple copies because I was under the impression that regardless that she could be upset, and I didn't want her to throw away a copy and that be it. So I printed her off about 3 to 5 copies. She did confess to me the following week that she did toss away. She was under the impression that she tossed away each of the copies, but there was one that she buried deeply inside of her purse, and she read it prior to our next session. I had no intentions on diving into that respective clinical disorder during this particular session. I had some other matters I wanted to discuss that I pulled from her treatment plan, but she wanted to dive into it, and she said, "Wow, Dr. Curry, this actually is me. This is something that I do." And speaking of which, the essential feature of dependent personality disorder is a pervasive and excessive distinguishing, perceived, individualized requirement to be taken care of, a sense of belonging. Such behavioral characteristics leads to submissiveness and adherence, subsequently manufacturing trepidation of separation. One reason amongst many that I dove into this respective clinical diagnosis, this particular client shared with me an incident in which she was under the impression that a gentleman she was dating at the time was going to leave her. So she felt as though that this was now time for her to dive into some antisocial behaviors that he was asking for, such as the depiction of pornographic images that he had wanted to sell. Not to say there's anything wrong with that as a professional, if someone's doing that willingly as a professional, but this was something that he was selling. And the reason why I said antisocial, she admitted to me that he wanted to collect these pornographic uh, images and video broadcastings to purchase or to sell or exchange for chemicals to abuse. He was involved with chemical abuse. So essentially, she was enabling and supporting his active addiction. She did not want to do this, but this was something she felt compelled to do, connecting this with the submissiveness aspect of a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. Individuals with features of or have been diagnosed with a dependent personality disorder diagnosis have considerable difficulties corresponding with decision making, whether it be constructive or counterproductive. In a sense, as far as making decisions on their own, there may be times in which they may need some assistance, even if they are of sound mind, intellectually sound, in that state. If they are mature, intellectually sound adults with a documented history of fulfilling obligations and tending to responsibilities on their own. When it comes to a dependent personality disorder diagnosis, these individuals may find themselves needing others to essentially make decisions for them. There could customarily be a requirement of excessive amounts of advice and reassurance from others, having a propensity of being immeasurably passive and allow their counterparts to assume the initiative and accountability for the vast majority of the occurrences. Adults with attributes of or diagnosed with dependent personality disorder frequently depend upon a parent, significant other, or close associate to make pertinent decisions for them. Their adolescent counterparts, on the other hand, generally follow the proverbial lead of their contemporaries, including engaging in criminality and substance abuse. A disproportionate amount of this presentation has focused on adults. I did want to use this point in the presentation to connect matters with children. With that bullet point, their adolescent counterparts generally follow the proverbial lead of their contemporaries, including engaging in criminality and substance abuse. I wanted to use the example of something in which that some of us may perhaps be able to connect with, to empathize with. We're walking to school with our neighborhood friends, or we're on the school bus, so we get off the school bus. Rather than going inside of the school, or rather than making that trip to the school, one of our contemporaries say, "I'm not saying that if we do this that we are endorsing a dependent personality disorder diagnosis, but this is a potential characteristic, particularly if it's something that's perpetuated over an extensive period of time." So one of our contemporaries on the way to school says, rather than going to school, let's go to an arcade, let's go to an amusement park, let's go somewhere other than school. And what's taking place here is one of us will say ourselves, we're saying to ourselves that I really need to get to school. There are some quizzes that I was informed of that will be happening today. I really would like to have that quiz. There's an examination that's coming. I really would like to be there for the extensive version of the facilitation of the study material. I don't want to get some printouts or make some notifications as far as to my classmates about what do I need to know, what do I need to study. I really should be there. Also, there's an athletic competition that if I'm absent, I will be excluded from the athletic competition. I really want to be involved with that. And perhaps more importantly, on top of everything else, perfect attendance is important to me because of academic achievement being something that's expected from a cross-generational standpoint. But despite all of that, despite all of those internal struggles, we're saying to ourselves that I know this is wrong. I'm going to go do it anyway. And rather than going to school, now this group that we're involved with, we're burglarizing homes, we're involved with property crimes, and we're doing things that could hinder our livelihood. We're doing something that could get us in trouble. And this is something that I would like to attribute to to a case in which I was learning about the accountability theory. There were three adolescents and one adult. The adolescent, the reason why the story was significant, the adolescent, one of the younger individuals of the group of four, they received the longest sentence, and this was north of 50 years, so approximately 55, 56 years sentence in state prison. What happened here was, of course, the question was, why weren't these three adolescents in school? Why were these three with a 20-year-old? Why was this 20-year-old associating with adolescents and utilizing them as company or acquaintances, or perhaps in this case, co-defendants in a criminogenic offense? What took place here is they burglarized a home in which they were under the impression in which was unoccupied. Come to find out, there was an occupant of the home, and this homeowner exercised their proverbial Second Amendment rights to bear arms. So what took place here is this homeowner was not expecting, or this occupant was not expecting anyone to come in. This individual took their weapon and they fired it, and one of the burglars, they ultimately lost their lives. So what took place here is, because of this respective state, if someone is involved with any form of felonious engagement and a life is taken, regardless of the manner in which how that life is taken, all of the perpetrators will be charged with and subsequently, depending on the circumstances, of course, convicted of one of the various levels of murder. In this case, it was first-degree murder. So the three surviving miscreants were charged with a level of murder, and they were all incarcerated, even though they did not have or brandish a weapon. So those particular matters, I would like to imagine that one or perhaps all of those adolescents said to themselves, perhaps I should go somewhere else. Perhaps this isn't the right decision. There's something wrong here. But for some reason, they were not able to pull themselves away. So those are circumstances in which someone is endorsing, at least presenting with features of a dependent personality disorder diagnosis, in which a decision is made based upon the interpretation, or based upon the manipulation, or based upon the input of someone else, even though we know this is wrong, even though we have an understanding of this is problematical, and this could potentially get us into a lot of trouble. Despite all of that, we go along with the indecision, and we just position ourselves to essentially deal with whatever's going to come our way, even if that includes potentially a 50-plus year period of incarceration in a state correctional facility, with us only being in our teenage years. One particular thing about a dependent personality disorder diagnosis is the need, the perhaps obsessiveness regarding that need to have that close relationship. One thing that could happen as far as someone endorsing a dependent personality disorder diagnosis, a relationship can come to an end. This could perhaps be an instrumental relationship, at least from the perspective of the individual. This comes to an end. This is where perhaps even reactive impulsiveness could kick in. What I mean by that is this individual may seek all measures to replace that relationship, to make certain that there isn't a significant period of time as far as not having involvement with some sort of significant relationship. This is something that could perhaps perpetuate itself to the point in which this individual may seek out whether a new relationship or ignite a previously extended relationship, even if it's a person in which this relationship could be toxic, even if this is something in which could be detrimental to the livelihood or well-being of this person. I've witnessed this on an array of occasions as far as clients I've worked with programmatically who presented with or who endorsed a dependent personality disorder diagnosis. Something would take place as far as perhaps an intimate relationship not working out, perhaps an argument with another loved one, perhaps a sibling, something of significance happening in which there's at least some sort of awareness that we perhaps may not be in communication for a short period of time. I've seen people return to affiliation with what's very well known to be toxic relationships. There's a woman I've worked with She was very involved, and still is very involved programmatically. But what took place here is unfortunately, she got into a family spat with her twin sister. So what happened here was I was conducting an individual counseling session through telehealth, and of course, under these particular circumstances, I like to at least ask for clients to be by themselves, to be in a place in which we can engage in collaborative dialogue without interaction. But what happened here was our uh, our timelines were it sort of blended a little bit, so she didn't make it to the location in which I was hoping she was going to be at, so we could have a productive telehealth individual counseling session. I guess pretty much not. I guess this is what happened once she entered the teleconferencing room. I guess not guess, but again, what took place was this person whom we both agreed that this was a very toxic relationship. This person heard my voice and appeared on the screen, just said hello. There was nothing disruptive. They said hello and they walked away. And prior to me diving into what I wanted to address during that individual counseling session, I said, wow, you're back with XYZ as far as associations. My client said, yes, this is someone I love significantly. They've been in my life for more than 2 decades. This is someone that's very prominent. But what I dove into is, okay, what's going to happen now? Did that person receive the help that they need? Now, of course, I'm not saying be done with this person forever. There were matters that were taking place. This person was struggling with certain issues, and those issues were essentially bleeding into the life, the welfare, and the well-being of the client in which I was providing clinical services for. And this was very well known. It was very obvious, and was discussed during individual counseling sessions. So what I was discussing was what's going to be different this time around. Has that person gotten the help that they needed? I knew that those were all rhetorical questions. I knew that there wasn't going to be anything of significance that was going to be different now, especially because it's only been, at least during that time, it's only been approximately 1 month since they had any interaction, at least to my knowledge, with each other. So what was taking place was essentially this person was seeking to replace a relationship, like I mentioned, with her twin sister, that she felt as though was at least going to be jeopardized or tainted temporarily in some form. Based off the information she gave me, they were just going to need a few days or perhaps a week or so apart, come back together, say I love you, we're twin sisters. We're not going to let something so insignificant, so minor, get into the way of our dynamic, our sisterhood, our special bond as being identical twins. But what she did in a reactive, impulsive manner, her twin sister was at least temporarily gone. She went and expeditiously replaced that relationship with unfortunately, with a toxic relationship from her past. And I'm not proud to say this, but unfortunately, I'm not happy to say this, but unfortunately, this did involve this particular client falling right back into various forms of antisocial behavior, staying out late, going to parties and matters along those lines in which there is substance abuse taking place. That happened. She unfortunately lost her job, and this things did spiral in the sense in which her involvement with Child Protective Services was reignited, and this all correlated with her seeking that relationship, seeking that toxic relationship with that individual that she knew she shouldn't have had any involvement with whatsoever, at least during that particular time, until they both were positioned to be more pro-social, not just for each other, but for themselves individually. We have now reached a point in this presentation in which we will discuss our final personality disorder, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Characteristics of obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is a different diagnosis actually from obsessive compulsive disorder, or otherwise known as OCD. So, obsessive compulsive personality disorder and OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, are actually two differing diagnoses. I wanted to make certain that we understood that and we were not blending or bleeding the language or terminology into each other, thinking that we're talking about one particular diagnosis when actually there are two different diagnoses, just similar name branding and matters along those lines. But returning to this, characteristics of obsessive compulsive personality disorder become overwhelming when an individual finds themselves consumed with preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and psychological and interpersonal control. This universally happens at the expense of flexibility, openness, and efficiency, beginning by early adulthood across an array of contexts. Extensive efforts are made regarding the sustainment of control through painstaking attention to rules, trivial details, procedures, lists, and scheduling, conceivably to the point in which the purpose of the activity is lost. Remaining along the lines, because I mentioned several moments ago that I spent a disproportionate amount of time throughout this presentation correlating the multiple personality disorders that I've covered during this presentation with adults. I wanted to keep this along the lines of with our adolescent population, with an adolescent potentially endorsing an obsessive compulsive personality disorder diagnosis. I made mentioning of these particular features universally presenting themselves at the expense of flexibility, openness, and efficiency. What's taking place here is correlating that with childhood. We're talking about a high school student. There's an important paper that must be turned in. Now, of course, we want to make certain, particularly with high school, with that being a very instrumental fork in the road, so to speak, not just academically, but from a sociological, developmental standpoint. This high school student has this paper to turn in, but this student wants this paper to be as perfect as possible. Despite the modifications that's been identified, this high school student just cannot finalize this document. Rather than saying, you know what, I've done the best I can, I made sacrifices, I've allocated X amount of time, X amount of days to this respective paper, I'm just going to turn it in. There is no more. I can't get it any better than what I can. This person may purposely seek out flaws. It may start matters over. They may change literally everything. They may start the document over, realizing that they've lost time, that all time has been exhausted, that it's now time to turn things in. They're still making these modifications. So now we reach the point of desperation. So rather than turning in something and getting some credit, they will intentionally not turn in anything because they want to make certain that this paper is absolutely flawless. Even though what they could have turned in would have gotten a flawless grade. From their standpoint, because of their obsessive compulsive personality, that document isn't turned in, and now they receive a 0 for not turning in anything. And rather being concerned about the 0, the most challenging problematical matter is actually still that paper. They cannot get it to be as flawless as they want it to be. And this is in a sense where the effects are snowballed. So now we're this obsessive compulsiveness as far as having those respective personality characteristics. Now we're diving into other areas of life in which those aspects of life are being tainted, are being jeopardized, are being impacted from a negative standpoint. Perfectionism and self-imposed high standards of performance has a propensity of triggering significant dysfunctioning, distress, and dysregulation. An excessive amount of time is allocated towards concentrating on whatever is on their proverbial plate, not excluding merely tending to household chores. Leisurely and recreational activities, when agreed upon to have engagement with, must have some level of organization from the individual to potentially reach a level of comfortability, such as the organization and correlation with athletic endeavors. So as far as, let's just say hypothetically, we're at a family reunion. We should be sitting back, relaxing, enjoying our loved ones who perhaps we do not get to see as often as we would like, particularly with everyone living lives here, everyone going there, and things along those lines. Rather than sitting back and just taking part at the foot races and the wonderful food and things of that nature, someone endorsing an obsessive compulsive personality disorder may find themselves needing to be in charge of everything. Even if there's others who are saying, you know, I'll take control of this, I'll take control of that. An obsessive compulsive personality, someone may say, no, I have to actually be involved with the organization of everything. And even under such circumstances, even if for some reason everyone else sits back and says, you know what, if that's what you want to do, you can run the show, we'll go along with your flow. With their level of perfectionism and self-imposed high standards, things still might not be good enough for them, even though they've actually controlled everything and everyone agreed upon it, because We show up to a family reunion and we just say to ourselves, you know what? I actually don't want to have any responsibilities. If you're taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, I can just sit back and enjoy wonderful food, wonderful weather, wonderful people, our family. I can just sit back and relax. And if you want to do it, I'm going to be fine either way. So I'll gladly hand over the reins to this if that's what you want to do. But the individual with the obsessive compulsive personality, they still, like I just mentioned, they still may not be able to relax, even though things are literally in their hands. Things are literally going to unfold because they are the event planner, they are the organizer, they are the facilitator. Things are in their control, and they still may not be happy with the outcome. They still may not be wholeheartedly satisfied with the direction and the manner in which things are going, despite them being in control 100%. Whether we're talking about an obsessive compulsive personality disorder or any of the personality disorders that's been discussed during this presentation, it wouldn't be uncommon for any of us to go over any personality disorder and say to ourselves, wow, you know what? I do that. Well, you know what? That's something that's been synonymous with my life, with my well being for as long as I can remember, if not my entire life. That does not necessarily mean that we are endorsing features of an obsessive compulsive personality disorder, an antisocial personality disorder, a histrionic personality disorder, or any other personality disorder diagnosis that we've discussed throughout this presentation. We could present with features of a respective diagnosis, but there are other diagnosable criteria that must be analyzed and must be evaluated and matters along those lines. And one thing in particular for us to meet the diagnosable criteria for any personality disorder or along those particular lines. But one thing in particular, if we have noticed any traits, or we do notice any traits, if we are a practitioner or if we are someone who struggles psychiatrically or psychologically, if we do have respective traits, that's okay. There are coping and replacement skills. There are interventions that could be utilized to help us gradually and methodically and safely work towards reducing features of said or respective personality disorder diagnosis. But one thing in particular, one thing along those lines, if we are at least presenting with features of a respective personality disorder diagnosis, that's okay. Where things get problematical is if they are essentially taking over various aspects of our lives from a problematical standpoint. If they are consuming us, if we're having these episodes, and rather than taking care of what's most important, we're so overwhelmed by this or that episode that it's essentially taking over what should be transpiring. That's perhaps where clinical intervention needs to take place. Many individuals throughout the United States of America, and even internationally, whom are highly successful, highly functioning, well educated, could present with characteristics of one or perhaps multiple personality disorders, and this is something that could happen simultaneously with us presenting with various personality disorders across multiple clusters, like I mentioned at the onset or the beginning stages or earlier in this presentation. Diagnosable considerations and psychiatric implications are only categorized as potentially needing to become part of the dynamic when corresponding traits trigger inflexibility, maladaptivity, and persist to the point by which significant functional impairment or subjective distress or dysregulation manifests itself. This centers on how instrumental treating personality disorders is through the utilization of psychotherapy and correlating interventions, and I addressed solution-focused brief therapy throughout this presentation, through psychoeducation, there's dialectical behavioral therapy, and other instrumentally sound, very advantageous interventions that could be used to help someone at least work towards reducing features of a respective personality disorder diagnosis. There's behavioral health medication management programming, or perhaps even medication-assisted treatment, spirituality, and even peer support group gatherings, or perhaps even, which I'm a huge advocate of, a combination of everything that's been discussed here as far as rehabilitative treatment to tend to reducing features of a respective personality disorder diagnosis. On that note, we have reached the end of this presentation that concentrated on personality disorders. please consider subscribing if this has not already taken place. Also contemplate liking this presentation and selecting the notification bell, which helps with the continued growth of this channel, and also so you can be notified when subsequent presentations have been uploaded. Review the website for Dr. Curry and Associates, which is www.drcurryandassociates.com. And we're also active on Twitter, with our Twitter handle being at Dr. Joshua Curry. Share all of this information with someone you think could benefit from it. Something here, elsewhere on this channel, or on the website or Twitter, or our Twitter account for Dr. Curry and Associates, helping someone progress away from the mismanagement of psychiatric episodes. I sincerely hope that the information that was depicted throughout this presentation was informative, and hopefully something here could either help you or help someone that you care about or love unconditionally. Thank you for taking part in this presentation, and I will catch you the next time around.